What if everything you believed about reality, about logic, truth, and identity was quietly built on contradictions? What if the world wasn't just complex, but paradoxical? From the outside, life seems to follow a rhythm. Cause and effect. Beginning and end. Choices and consequences. But the deeper you go, the more you observe, question, and feel, the more reality starts to wobble. The more it blurs. Beneath the surface of our daily lives hides a labyrinth of paradoxes. Not just puzzles of logic, but riddles that expose the fragile edges of human thought and the universe itself. They twist time. They bend reason. They force us to ask, what is real? In this journey, we won't be solving puzzles. We'll be walking into them, letting them crack open the assumptions we never thought to question. Each paradox we explore won't just be a quirk of thought, it will be a mirror. A mirror that reflects the uncomfortable truths we tend to ignore. And with every reflection, you'll see yourself more clearly. Not because the paradox reveals an answer, but because it reveals the limits of the questions we've been asking. This isn't a lecture. It's a descent into life-changing paradoxes, each one built to reshape how you see logic, life, and the fragile illusion of certainty. So take a breath. Let go of what you think you know. And step into the maze. Because sometimes, the only way to understand reality is to watch it unravel. Paradox 1. The Mirror's Edge Paradox. The closer you get to truth, the less of yourself you see. Imagine you're standing in a room full of mirrors. Not just mirrors on the walls, but above you, below you, and stretching into infinity. Each mirror reflects your every move, your every breath. At first, it feels like power, clarity. You're surrounded by versions of yourself. Infinite perspectives, infinite awareness. But as you begin to walk toward one of the mirrors, something strange happens. The closer you get, the less you see. Your reflection starts to blur. Your features fade. Until, just inches from the glass, you're gone. Not invisible, just no longer there. This is the Mirror's Edge Paradox. A riddle of perception that flips self-awareness on its head. It asks, what happens when the pursuit of truth erases the one who's seeking it? We live in an age obsessed with self-knowledge, self-reflection, self-improvement. We dive into psychology, mindfulness, philosophy, all in hopes of finding clarity. But what if clarity isn't found by looking inward? What if, instead, it's lost there? The philosophy of vanishing selves. In ancient Buddhist thought, there is the concept of anatta, the doctrine of no self. It claims that the self, as we experience it, is an illusion, a story, a flickering collage of sensations, memories, and labels that we mistake for something solid. When you begin to question who you are, piece by piece, the illusion begins to fall apart. I'm a thinker. But who thinks the thought? I'm a body. But are you your hand? Your heartbeat? Your blood? I'm my memories. Then who remembers? You chase the truth of who you are like chasing your reflection in a mirror. The closer you get, the more it slips away. Until all that's left is silence. The scientific echo. Neuroscience has its own strange version of this. Studies show that when we try to pinpoint the exact location of the self in the brain, we can't. There's no single place that you live. No throne. No control room. Just a web of connections, inputs, triggers, chemical echoes. And the more we map it, the more we realize the self is not a thing. It's an emergent phenomenon, a mirage. But here's the kicker. If your self is a construction, who's the one trying to deconstruct it? Real-life mirrors. Think about the moments when you felt most confused about who you are. Not during times of chaos, but during stillness. During long nights alone with your thoughts. During deep journaling, therapy, meditation, spiritual searching. The deeper you dig, the more the ground beneath you crumbles. What once felt like a solid identity becomes a field of contradictions. And paradoxically, the more you try to know yourself, the more unknowable you become. Because identity, like a mirror, requires distance. Stand too close, and all you see is blur. Why it matters. So why does this paradox shake us? Because it threatens the one thing we're told to always trust: ourselves. But the mirror's edge paradox reveals something uncomfortable. Maybe we're not meant to find ourselves. Maybe we're meant to lose ourselves. And watch what remains. Maybe the point isn't to define who we are, but to realize that we are always changing, always reflecting, always disappearing, just as we arrive. This paradox doesn't destroy the self. It humbles it. It whispers that truth isn't found in mirrors, but in the awareness that mirrors can't hold. So the next time you search for yourself in a reflection, ask not what you see, ask what's looking. Paradox 2, the scarcity of abundance paradox. The more you have, the less you experience. Picture this. You walk into a grand library. The shelves stretch so high, they vanish into the ceiling. The walls ripple with color-coded spines. Tens of thousands of books, each promising a journey, a revelation, a truth. You feel excited, overwhelmed. You pick up one book, then another, then 10 more. You sit to read, but can't choose where to begin. Every title you don't open haunts you with the possibility of being better, more thrilling, more meaningful. Eventually, you leave. Not because you found nothing, but because there was too much. This is the scarcity of abundance paradox. The strange truth that having everything can make us feel like we have nothing at all. In a world of limitless access, infinite scrolling, and on-demand everything, we're drowning in abundance. And yet, we're lonelier, more anxious, more distracted. We have more choices than ever before, and somehow, less clarity. Why? Because the human mind was never meant to swim in oceans of possibility. When options become a cage, at the heart of this paradox is a psychological phenomenon: choice overload. When faced with too many options, our ability to decide actually weakens. We fear making the wrong choice. We hesitate. We overthink. And eventually, we choose nothing at all. It's not just indecision. It's paralysis. Like standing at a fork in the road. Except this fork has 10,000 prongs. Every step forward feels like betrayal of the paths not taken. And so, we stand still. The tragedy of the buffet. Imagine an all-you-can-eat buffet. 30 dishes. Unlimited access. You start eating everything, just a little bit of each. But halfway through, something shifts. You're full, but unsatisfied. You tasted everything, but enjoyed nothing. Because there wasn't enough space for the experience to land. You didn't savor. You sampled. And when everything is available, nothing feels special. The psychological price of plenty. Abundance often leads to lower satisfaction. Why? Because abundance creates an illusion that happiness lies in what's next. One more video. One more purchase. One more scroll. But satisfaction isn't found in the next choice. It's found in presence with the current one. The paradox is this: when everything is available, we start chasing, instead of experiencing. We consume, but don't digest. We watch, but don't absorb. We have, but don't feel. The minimalist truth. In contrast, scarcity often amplifies experience. A rare meal. A once-in-a-lifetime trip. A single handwritten letter. These moments feel sacred, not because they're objectively better, but because they're limited. They demand attention. They hold weight. They remind us that meaning isn't about quantity, it's about depth. And depth requires space. What this paradox teaches us. The scarcity of abundance paradox isn't anti-progress. It's not about rejecting choice. It's about remembering that more isn't always better. That freedom of choice doesn't mean freedom from suffering. And that a meaningful life isn't built from everything. It's built from intentional somethings. In a world of infinite libraries, the deepest wisdom comes not from what you could read, but from the few pages you choose to truly understand. So the next time you feel overwhelmed by options, pause. Pick one. Let it matter. Because sometimes, the richest life isn't one where you have everything, but one where you're truly present with anything. Paradox 3. The Control Illusion Paradox. The more you try to control life, the more out of control it feels. You're driving a car on a stormy night. Rain lashes the windshield. You grip the wheel tighter. Eyes wide. Shoulders tense. You double-check the mirrors. You slow down. You anticipate every bend, every skid, every danger. But mile after mile, your heartbeat quickens. Your hands begin to sweat. Because the more you try to control every detail, the more fragile that control begins to feel. This is the Control Illusion Paradox. The contradiction that the harder we try to control life, the more out of control we often feel. We believe that planning more, predicting more, preparing more will bring us peace. But it rarely does. Because life doesn't run on scripts. And uncertainty doesn't follow commands. The psychology of control. Humans crave control. It gives us the illusion of safety, of predictability, of power. We obsess over calendars, track our sleep, color code our goals, plan every hour of every day. But beneath that structure, there's fear. Fear of being caught off guard. Fear of being vulnerable. Fear of losing what we love. And so we tighten our grip. Not out of confidence, but out of survival. The grip that slips. Imagine holding sand in your hand. Squeeze too tight, and it slips through your fingers. Hold it gently, and it stays. This is how control works. The more force we apply, the more fragile everything becomes. We try to control others, and push them away. We try to control our emotions, and they grow louder. We try to control the future, and feel crushed by its weight. Control is not power, presence is. True power doesn't come from trying to dominate life. It comes from learning how to dance with it. Like a surfer on a wave. They're not in control of the ocean, but they flow with it, balance with it, time their movements to its rhythm. That's not weakness. That's mastery. That's real power. Because when you stop trying to control everything, you finally gain control over the one thing that matters: yourself. Why this paradox haunts us. The Control Illusion Paradox threatens one of our deepest beliefs. That we are the architects of our destiny. That we can bend life to our will. And in some ways, we can. But control is not the same as certainty. Life isn't a chessboard. It's a thunderstorm. And peace doesn't come from knowing where every drop will fall. It comes from learning how to walk in the rain. The takeaway. This paradox whispers something radical. That letting go is not defeat. It's wisdom. Surrender doesn't mean you've lost. It means you've realized you never needed to fight in the first place. Letting go doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop clenching. You release the illusion. You soften into the moment. And from that softness, you find a strength that doesn't crack under pressure. So the next time you feel the urge to tighten your grip, pause, breathe, and ask yourself, am I guiding this moment, or am I strangling it? Because sometimes, the path to true control is to stop trying so hard to control the path. Paradox 4. The Connection-Disconnection Paradox. The more connected we become, the more alone we feel. You're in a crowded room. Dozens of voices. Laughter. Conversations. Clinking glasses. But your eyes are on a screen. You're scrolling. Notifications. Reactions. Stories. Comments. Hundreds of tiny signals of interaction. And yet, a heaviness creeps in. A quiet ache. Because despite being surrounded, digitally or physically, you feel deeply, unmistakably, alone. This is the connection-disconnection paradox. The strange, hollow contradiction of modern life. We've never been more reachable, and never felt more invisible. Because connection, true connection, isn't about access. It's about presence. And presence is what we've traded. When proximity isn't intimacy. We live in an era of hyperconnectivity. Text, email, likes, voice notes, comments, emojis. We ping each other from across the world in seconds. But somewhere along the way, we began confusing contact with closeness. We started mistaking a like for love, a notification for validation, a friend count for friendship. But behind every glowing screen is a quiet emptiness, a hunger for the kinds of connection that technology can't replicate. Eye contact, vulnerability, silence shared without fear, the loneliness of the digital mirror. Social media was built to connect us, but in many ways, it turned us into performers. We polish, we edit, we curate the highlights, we filter the mess. And when everyone else is doing the same, we feel pressure to be on even when we're falling apart. It becomes exhausting, because we're not connecting. We're broadcasting. And the more we broadcast, the more disconnected we become from our real selves. Real connection requires real risk. Genuine connection demands vulnerability. It asks us to be messy, to be honest, to be human. But in a world where every word can be screenshot, where every mistake can go viral, we build walls. We protect ourselves with sarcasm, with silence, with screens. And in doing so, we keep people out, even when we desperately want them in. The heart of the paradox. The connection-disconnection paradox isn't about blaming technology. It's about how we use it. Because the paradox isn't about the tools. It's about our attention, our presence, our willingness to be awkward, to sit in silence, to hear someone, without checking the clock, to say, I'm here, fully, right now. In the digital age, that kind of presence is revolutionary, a quiet revolution. This paradox calls us to reconnect, not just with others, but with ourselves, to log out, to look up, to listen. Not just with ears, but with care. Because maybe the antidote to loneliness isn't more messages. It's more moments. Moments where we're not trying to impress, not trying to edit, not trying to win, just being. Side by side, breath to breath. A quiet moment that says, you're not alone. And maybe, that's enough. Paradox 5, the progress regression paradox. The higher we climb, the more meaningless it can feel. You wake up to headlines, a new breakthrough, an AI that paints, a robot that does surgery, a pill that extends life. You scroll through posts, friends building startups, traveling the world, launching podcasts. You should feel inspired. But instead, you feel tired, small, behind. Like no matter how fast you run, you're always falling short. This is the progress regression paradox. The strange contradiction where, as the world accelerates, we often feel like we're falling further behind. Every step forward in human progress seems to leave us feeling more anxious, more pressured, more insufficient. How did our greatest achievements become a source of suffering? When better becomes never enough. For most of history, progress meant survival. Better tools, better food, safer shelter, longer life. But today, progress isn't about needs. It's about optimization. Faster, smarter, stronger, younger, more. And in a world addicted to more, we're conditioned to believe that we are never enough. We chase goals not for joy, but to escape the fear of being left behind. The social comparison trap. Every innovation becomes a mirror. Every achievement becomes a scoreboard. It's no longer enough to do meaningful work. It must go viral. No longer enough to be healthy. You must biohack yourself into superhuman. No longer enough to learn. You must monetize, scale, disrupt. Progress whispers, you could be more. And that whisper becomes a roar. One that drowns out presence and poisons peace. The burden of acceleration. In the 20th century, we dreamed of flying cars. Now we carry supercomputers in our pockets. And yet, We can't go 10 minutes without checking them. Why? Because when the world accelerates, the soul doesn't. Our inner world still runs on ancient rhythms: stillness, touch, story, silence, meaning. But in our race for advancement, we abandoned the things that ground us. Progress gave us speed, but stripped us of depth. What this paradox teaches us: the progress regression paradox doesn't argue against growth, but it asks, what are we growing into? At what cost? It reminds us that advancement without alignment leads to emptiness. That just because something is faster or smarter doesn't mean it's better. And that true progress isn't climbing an endless ladder. It's choosing the right direction and questioning if the view at the top is worth the climb. Slowing down to move forward. Maybe true progress isn't measured in downloads, digits, or follower counts. Maybe it's measured in how we treat each other, how deeply we love, how present we are with ourselves. Maybe we need to reclaim the pace of being human, to move forward, not to escape the past, but to bring our full selves into the future. So the next time you feel like you're falling behind, pause, breathe, reconnect. Because sometimes, the fastest way to move forward is to stop chasing. Paradox 6, the Freedom Trap Paradox. The more freedom you gain, the more trapped you might feel. You've won the dream life. No boss. No deadlines. No expectations. You can go anywhere. Be anyone. Do anything. It should feel exhilarating. But instead, you feel anxious. You wake up and don't know where to go. You stare at the calendar empty. You stare at your options endless. And somehow, in this wide open life, you feel lost. Not because you have nothing, but because you have everything. This is the Freedom Trap Paradox. The idea that too much freedom can become a kind of paralysis. That with infinite choice comes infinite pressure. That when nothing restricts us, we stop knowing what to reach for. The illusion of infinite choice. We're told that freedom is the highest good. Freedom to choose our path, our partner, our passion, our belief system. But when you strip away all constraints, you're left with one daunting question: now what? And when the answer isn't obvious, freedom doesn't feel like power, it feels like weight. Every decision becomes a reflection of identity. Every missed opportunity feels like a failure. Every quiet moment feels like you're wasting your potential. The blank canvas problem. A blank canvas should be an artist's dream. But often, it's terrifying. Because with no starting point, there's no direction. You fear choosing the wrong color, the wrong brushstroke, the wrong idea. So instead of creating, you hesitate. And in that hesitation, freedom becomes fear. The anxiety of identity. In a world of total freedom, you are the sole architect of your life. No map, no boundaries, no one to blame. Every outcome becomes your responsibility. And while that can be empowering, it can also be crushing. Because when nothing limits you, you can no longer hide behind limitations. You become not just free, but accountable for everything. And when things go wrong, the guilt is yours alone. The hunger for structure. This is why many people seek out structure voluntarily. Religions, routines, disciplines, minimalism. Because limits don't just confine us. They shape us. They create meaning, rhythm, direction. They give the chaos form. Because without boundaries, even paradise becomes a prison of potential. Freedom versus fulfillment. We confuse freedom with fulfillment. But fulfillment doesn't come from doing whatever you want. It comes from doing something that matters. From commitment. From sacrifice. From choosing a path and walking it. Even when other roads remain unexplored. Because ultimately, freedom without purpose is just floating. But freedom with purpose becomes flight. What this paradox teaches us. The Freedom Trap Paradox doesn't mean we should fear choice. It means we must pair freedom with intention. With values. With meaning. with self-awareness. Not what do I feel like doing, but what am I willing to build my life around? Because sometimes, the most liberating thing you can do is to stop chasing every open door and choose one that you'll walk through with your whole heart. Paradox 7, the attention inversion paradox. The more attention you give away, the less seen you feel. You wake up and check your phone, messages, news, notifications, ads, updates. You respond. You scroll. You react. You engage. You give your attention freely, constantly, endlessly. And by nightfall, you've been busy all day, plugged in, tuned in, dialed in, but you feel drained. Not just tired, but disconnected. Not just overwhelmed, but invisible. Despite interacting with the world all day, you feel like no one truly saw you. Not even you. This is the attention inversion paradox. The cruel irony that in the age of attention, the more we give it away, the more we lose ourselves. Because attention isn't just a tool. It's your essence, your energy, your focus, your presence. And when it's scattered everywhere, you are too. The age of attention extraction. Your attention is valuable. That's not a metaphor. It's a business model. Every ping, every buzz, every red dot. They're not just reminders. They're hooks, designed to keep your eyes on the screen and off of your own life. You're not just the user. You're the product. And while the world fights to capture your attention, no one teaches you how to protect it. When you become a mirror, when you give your attention to everything, you start becoming a reflection of everything. Other people's opinions, other people's goals, other people's expectations. You become a collage, a highlight reel of everyone else's lives. But inside, you feel hollow, because the parts of you that need your attention go unseen, unheard, untouched. The self that fades. Your attention is how you remember yourself. When you give it away constantly, to apps, feeds, content, noise, you forget how to be with your own thoughts. You start to fear silence. You avoid stillness. You numb out with stimulation. And over time, you stop recognizing the voice inside you, because you've only been listening to everything else. The attention economy versus emotional poverty. You're connected to the world, but disconnected from your breath, your emotions, your body, because giving your attention to everything means giving your presence to nothing. You become reactive instead of reflective, restless instead of rooted, scattered instead of whole. The power of reclaiming focus. But what happens when you stop? When you look up from the screen and back into yourself? Something quiet begins to stir. Clarity, calm, a forgotten inner voice. You begin to notice the warmth in your chest, the idea that's been trying to reach you for days, the ache beneath your busyness. This is the power of directed attention. Not outward, but inward. What this paradox teaches us. The attention inversion paradox teaches us that attention is not just a resource. It is your life force. It's what determines what grows, what heals, what transforms. And when you spend it all on the external, you starve the internal. You don't need more focus. You need more intention. More moments where you pause and ask, what am I feeding with my attention? And what is dying in me from neglect? Because sometimes, the only way to feel truly seen is to start truly seeing yourself. Paradox 8. The vulnerability shield paradox. The more you hide your pain, the more it controls you. You're at a gathering. You smile. You joke. You tell a funny story about your week. People laugh. You nod. You sip your drink. But deep inside, something aches. A grief. A fear. A wound you've never fully spoken. You don't share it. You don't cry. You don't let it rise. Because if you did, what if they judged you? What if they left? So you keep it in. You build a wall. And for a moment, it works. But eventually, The wall becomes a prison. And the very thing you built to protect yourself becomes the thing that isolates you. This is the vulnerability shield paradox. The emotional contradiction that the more we bury our pain to appear strong, the more that pain quietly owns us. It's the paradox of pretending, of living behind a mask so long, we forget what our face even looks like, why we fear being seen. From childhood, we're taught, don't cry, don't show weakness, don't make it uncomfortable. So we armor up. We become the peacemaker, the perfectionist, the achiever, the helper. We become everything except honest. But what we don't realize is, every layer of protection we put on also blocks connection. The quiet collapse. When you hide your pain long enough, people stop asking. They assume you're fine. They see the smile. They believe the script. And over time, you start to believe it too. Until one day, you collapse. Not because you're weak, but because you've been strong for too long, alone. Because pain that's never spoken doesn't disappear. It just gets heavier. The weight of silence. Pain that isn't processed gets stored in your body, your posture, your tone, your habits, your reactions. It shows up as tension, as overthinking, as burnout, as distance in your relationships. You think you're hiding it, but your nervous system isn't fooled. And neither are the people who love you deeply. They can feel it, even if they don't know what it is. The power of being seen. Think back to a moment when someone truly saw you. Not your performance, not your mask. You. Maybe they said, you don't have to do this alone. Maybe they just sat with you, in silence. That moment cracked something open. Because real connection doesn't require answers. Just honesty. Just presence. Just someone brave enough to say, this hurts, but I'm not running anymore. What this paradox teaches us. The vulnerability shield paradox teaches us that strength isn't silence. It's courage. The courage to say, I'm struggling. I'm overwhelmed. I need help. And to believe that saying those words doesn't make you smaller. It makes you human. Because when you open the door to your own pain, you give others permission to do the same. You create connection where there once was isolation. You create healing where there once was hiding. And the armor, it's no longer needed. So the next time you feel like you have to keep it all together, pause. Ask yourself, what would happen if I let someone in? Because maybe the thing you think will make people walk away is the very thing that will finally bring them closer. Paradox 9, the certainty-uncertainty paradox. The more certain you are, the less you learn. You meet someone who speaks with conviction. They know what's right, what's true, what's real. No hesitation, no doubt. At first, it's impressive. But then, you notice something. They don't ask questions. They don't change their mind. They don't leave room for curiosity. Their certainty feels less like wisdom, and more like a fortress. A rigid, guarded place where no new ideas are allowed in. And inside that fortress, nothing grows. This is the certainty-uncertainty paradox. The quiet realization that the more tightly we hold our beliefs, the more blind we may become to what lies beyond them. Certainty feels safe. It gives us confidence, control, a sense of power. But when held too tightly, it becomes a barrier, not a foundation. The trap of I know. Certainty stops the search. It tells the brain, you've arrived. No more questions. No more growth. And that's dangerous. Because the world is not static. And truth is rarely one size fits all. The moment you say I know, and close the door on curiosity, you risk becoming stuck in an echo chamber of your own thoughts. Wisdom wears humility. The wisest people don't speak in absolutes. They say, I could be wrong. I'm still learning. What's your take? They leave space. Not because they don't know anything, but because they've seen how much there is to know. They understand. The more you know, the more you realize how much you don't. That isn't weakness. It's wisdom. The freedom of uncertainty. It's tempting to crave answers, to wrap everything in logic and call it truth. But real life doesn't fit in boxes. It's messy, fluid, often contradictory. When you embrace uncertainty, you begin to see differently. You become more flexible, more compassionate, less reactive. You stop needing to be right and start wanting to understand. And in that shift, your mind expands, your heart softens, and your world becomes richer. What this paradox teaches us. The certainty-uncertainty paradox reminds us that the goal isn't to eliminate doubt. It's to walk with it, with grace. It's to trade arrogance for awe, rigidity for reflection. It's to say, I don't know. And maybe that's where the beauty begins. Because the danger isn't in being wrong. It's in being so sure you're right that you stop listening, stop learning, stop evolving. So the next time you feel certain, so certain you can't imagine another point of view, pause. Ask yourself, is this truth or just comfort? Is this wisdom or just defense? Because sometimes, the smartest person in the room is the one still asking questions. Paradox 10, the achievement emptiness paradox. The higher you climb, the more meaningless it can feel. You've done everything right. Worked the long hours, hit the targets, collected the trophies, built the resume, and finally, you reach the summit. The job, the title, the applause, the checkmark on the dream. People congratulate you. You smile. You post the highlight. But that night, you lie awake, and a quiet voice asks, is this it? This is the achievement emptiness paradox. The unexpected hollowness that follows reaching a long-sought goal. It's not failure. It's not depression. It's the realization that success without depth doesn't satisfy. Because when you climb only to achieve, you risk losing sight of what it means to belong, to connect, to feel whole. The myth of arrival. We're taught that happiness lies at the end of effort. That once you've made it, you'll feel proud, fulfilled, complete. But arrival is an illusion. Because the finish line keeps moving. You hit the milestone, and the next one appears. You win, and feel pressure to defend the win. You succeed, and feel even more afraid of falling. And beneath it all, the emptiness whispers, what was it all for? When worth becomes performance, many of us confuse achievement with identity. We believe, if I succeed, I matter. If I'm the best, I'm lovable. If I win, I'm safe. But when worth is tied to outcomes, every failure becomes a threat to your existence. Every rest feels like laziness. Every pause feels like falling behind. You don't own your success. Your success owns you. The success hangover. The applause fades. The inbox quiets. The achievement is done. And in the silence, you meet yourself again. But without the race to run. Who are you? Without the next goal to chase. What do you feel? Sometimes, the emptiness isn't a lack of success. It's a lack of alignment. Success filled your calendar, but not your soul. Redefining success. What if success wasn't about climbing? What if it was about depth, not height? What if real success meant living with integrity, creating something meaningful, loving fiercely, being present? We've measured success by how loud it looks, how fast it moves, how many people clap. But what if the deepest form of success can't be seen from the outside? What if it's found in stillness, in kindness, in truth? What this paradox teaches us. The achievement emptiness paradox reminds us that accomplishments don't complete you. They reveal where you're looking for completion. And if you're chasing validation, no achievement will ever be enough. But if you're rooted in meaning, then even the quietest wins will feel full. So ask yourself, am I chasing this to prove something? Or to express something true within me? Because the most powerful kind of success isn't loud, isn't flashy, and isn't on anyone's timeline but your own. So the next time you hit a goal and feel empty, don't panic. Don't run. Sit with it. Let it ask you. Now that you've proven yourself, are you ready to finally meet yourself? Paradox 11, the Ego Fragility Paradox. The stronger your ego becomes, the easier it is to shatter. You meet someone with presence. They speak with power, walk with certainty, command the room. They know who they are, what they believe, where they stand. But then, someone disagrees. Someone criticizes. Someone challenges their image. And suddenly, they explode. They withdraw. They crumble. What looked like confidence was really a shield. And behind that shield was something deeply fragile. This is the Ego Fragility Paradox. The quiet truth that the more tightly we cling to who we think we are, the more threatened we become by anything that doesn't fit that image. The ego, when overgrown, becomes brittle. Not flexible. Not strong. Just scared. Defensive. Ready to break. The ego's real job. The ego isn't bad. It's a structure. A boundary. A necessary survival tool. It helps us say I am. I matter. I exist. But problems arise when the ego stops being a tool and becomes a performance. When every conversation becomes a battlefield. Every disagreement, a threat. Every failure, a shame spiral. The ego tells you to protect your image at all costs. But in doing so, it disconnects you from your authenticity. The illusion of strength. Ego says, I have to win. I can't be wrong. I must be admired. But real strength sounds different. It says, I can learn. I might be wrong. I'm still evolving. The paradox. The more fragile your ego, the more you need to appear strong. The more you need to be seen a certain way. The more easily you break when you're not. The cost of image. When your identity depends on being the smart one, you fear looking ignorant. When it depends on being the strong one, you suppress your sadness. When it depends on being the successful one, you hide your failures. And eventually, you stop taking risks. Stop being vulnerable. Stop growing. Because the fear of shattering the image becomes more powerful than the desire to expand the self. True strength is soft. The most powerful people you'll meet are often the softest, not because they lack boundaries, but because they don't need to prove anything. They can say, I don't know. I was wrong. I'm still learning. Why? Because their identity isn't built on performance. It's built on presence. They don't need to be perfect, just real. They don't need admiration. They seek connection. What this paradox teaches us. The Ego Fragility Paradox reveals a deeper kind of strength. The strength to be seen in your imperfection. To receive feedback without crumbling. To change your mind without shame. It invites you to release the need to look strong and begin the practice of being whole. Because ego thrives on defense. But growth lives in humility. And when you let go of needing to be someone, you become free to be yourself. So the next time your pride flares, when you're criticized, challenged, or questioned, pause. Ask yourself, am I protecting my growth? Or just my image? Because sometimes, the softest hearts are the ones that have finally stopped pretending to be unbreakable. Paradox 12, the Productivity Stagnation Paradox. The more you do, the less you accomplish. You start your day with a list. It's long, ambitious, color-coded and planned to perfection. You reply to emails. You jump into meetings. You check boxes. You stay busy. By the time evening arrives, you've been in motion for hours. But something feels off. You've done so much. And yet, you feel like you've moved nowhere. This is the Productivity Stagnation Paradox. The uncomfortable truth that busyness does not equal progress. That action without direction can become a trap, a loop, an illusion of effectiveness that slowly starves your soul. The hustle illusion. We live in a culture that worships hustle. Waking early, working late, maximizing every second, turning every hobby into a hustle. You're praised for being exhausted, rewarded for being overbooked. But productivity becomes dangerous when it becomes your identity. When your worth is measured by your output, not your presence. When you're constantly asking, what's next? Instead of, what matters? When motion becomes avoidance. Sometimes, we stay busy to avoid the things that truly need our attention. We answer emails instead of facing hard decisions. We optimize our calendars instead of sitting with uncomfortable feelings. We rush through the day so we don't have to ask, why am I doing any of this in the first place? Productivity becomes a shield, protecting us from reflection. The law of diminishing returns. There's a point where doing more achieves less. Your brain burns out. Your creativity dulls. Your clarity disappears. You're checking boxes, but forgetting why you made the list. You're moving fast, but not getting anywhere. Like a car revving at redline all day. Eventually, something breaks. And it's not the work. It's you. Doing less to do more. Real productivity isn't about doing everything. It's about doing the right things. With care. With depth. With focus. Sometimes, the most meaningful work happens in stillness. In long walks. In journaling. In staring at the ceiling and letting your mind breathe. Because in that space, real insight arrives. The kind that can't be rushed. The kind that isn't loud, but lasting. What this paradox teaches us. The productivity stagnation paradox reminds us that busyness is not a badge. That doing more doesn't mean becoming more. And that sometimes, stillness is the most radical form of action. So the next time you feel overwhelmed by your own schedule, stop. Close the tabs. Put down the list. And ask, if I only did one thing today, what would truly matter? What's meaningful, not just measurable? Because in the end, the most productive life isn't the one filled with activity, it's the one filled with intention. Paradox 13, the isolation of independence paradox. The more self-sufficient you become, the more disconnected you may feel. You've worked hard to stand on your own. You pay your bills, solve your problems, show up, no matter what. You don't ask for help. You don't burden anyone. You handle it. People admire your strength, your resilience, your independence. But one evening, when the world feels heavy, you scroll through your contacts and realize there's no one you feel safe calling. You've built a life that doesn't need anyone. But in doing so, you've forgotten how to let anyone in. This is the isolation of independence paradox. The heartbreaking truth that the more capable you become, the harder it is to feel connected. You don't just live alone. You carry everything alone. And that weight was never meant for one person. The myth of the lone wolf. Society celebrates the lone wolf. The entrepreneur. The self-made success. The one who never cries. We call it strength. But real wolves don't hunt alone. They thrive in packs. And real humans, we were never meant to live without support. Without shoulders to lean on. Without spaces where we can fall apart. Hyper-independence is often a wound. For many, independence isn't a choice. It's a response. To being let down. To being hurt. To learning early that no one else was coming. So we survive. We adapt. We become our own everything. But deep down, we still long for someone to hold us. To say, you don't have to carry this alone. The invisible cost. Hyper-independence looks strong on the outside. But it comes at a quiet cost. Loneliness. Exhaustion. A heart that never gets to exhale. You don't complain. You don't collapse. You just keep going. While slowly forgetting what it feels like to be truly seen. You stop asking for help. Not because you don't need it, but because you don't know how anymore. And that's the paradox. The very walls you built to protect yourself are the same ones keeping everyone out. The power of interdependence. The solution isn't giving up your independence. It's remembering that strength and support can coexist. That asking for help isn't weakness. It's wisdom. That vulnerability isn't dependence. It's trust. Interdependence means, I can stand on my own, but I don't have to stand alone. It's the courage to let others care, to be messy, to be soft, and still believe you're worthy of love. What this paradox teaches us. The isolation of independence paradox is a call to come home. To remember that freedom is hollow without connection. That self-sufficiency is noble, but not sacred. And that the strongest thing you might ever do is say to someone, I need you. I can't do this alone. Can you just sit with me? Because we're not meant to live lives of quiet burden. We're meant to belong. So the next time your pain tells you to isolate, to carry it yourself, again, pause. Let someone in. Because true strength is knowing when it's time to reach for a hand. Paradox 14, the purpose anxiety paradox. The more desperately you search for your purpose, the more lost you may feel. You've heard it your whole life. Find your purpose. Live your passion. Do what you were born to do. So you search. You read the books. Take the tests. Follow the influencers. Switch paths. Change jobs. You journal. Manifest. Visualize. But instead of clarity, you feel pressure. Instead of peace, you feel panic. And in the back of your mind, a quiet question grows louder. What if I never find it? This is the purpose anxiety paradox. The strange reality that the more we obsess over finding our purpose, the more anxious, inadequate, and stuck we begin to feel. Purpose becomes a burden, a demand, a finish line we're sprinting toward without knowing if it even exists. The myth of one true purpose. We're told that there's one perfect role, one mission, one calling we're meant to fulfill, and that once we find it, everything will make sense. But this myth creates panic. Because if you're not constantly inspired, you must be off track. If your work doesn't feel like destiny, it must be wrong. If you haven't found your purpose, you must be behind. But the truth is, purpose is not found like buried treasure. It's built like a home, one brick at a time. Purpose is often retrospective. Think of the most meaningful things in your life. The relationships. The growth. The moments that changed you. Did you plan them? Or did they emerge unexpectedly through engagement? Through showing up? Through saying yes? Through living? Purpose is often something we see clearly only when we look back. It's not a single path. It's a pattern, revealed in reflection. The trap of constant searching. Purpose anxiety comes from a hidden belief. If I don't find my exact path, I'll waste my life. But this belief keeps you running, questioning, doubting, always preparing, never living. And the more you search for what you're supposed to do, the further you drift from who you already are. You overlook the meaning in small things. The way you listen. The way you show up. The way you care. Because you're too busy chasing something bigger. But what if the smallest things are already your purpose? What if purpose is a direction, not a destination? What if purpose isn't a job title? Or a business? Or a moment of divine clarity? What if it's a way of being? A thread that runs through your choices, your values, your presence. Purpose might not be something you do. It might be how you show up to everything you do. With intention. With love. With curiosity. What this paradox teaches us. The purpose anxiety paradox teaches us that we don't find purpose through panic. We find it through presence. Through committing to what's in front of us. Through creating value right where we are. And from that commitment, purpose begins to reveal itself. Not in fireworks, but in a quiet, steady glow. So the next time you feel lost in the search, pause. Stop asking, what's my purpose? And start asking, how can I live today with meaning? Because maybe, you don't need to discover your purpose. You just need to start living like you already have one. Paradox 15, the wisdom paradox. The more wisdom you gain, the more uncertain you become. You've read, listened, lived, fallen, grown. You've seen enough of life to know how it works, and how often it doesn't. You've collected truths, formed insights, learned lessons the hard way, and now, you speak more softly. You answer more slowly. You pause before assuming. People call you wise. But you don't feel certain. In fact, you feel more unsure than ever. This is the wisdom paradox. The curious reality that the more deeply you understand life, the less you cling to having it figured out. Because true wisdom doesn't bring answers. It brings humility. It opens you to how much more there is to learn, to question, to sit with. When knowing becomes wonder, there's a reason why the wisest people rarely interrupt. Why they ask more questions than they give advice. Because wisdom isn't loud. It's listening. It isn't confident in everything. It's curious about everything. It doesn't demand certainty. It dances with paradox. The wise know that life isn't a puzzle to solve, but a poem to feel. That truth is often layered, shifting, complex. That opposing things can be equally real. Socratic ignorance. The ancient philosopher Socrates once said, "The only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing." He didn't mean literal ignorance. He meant awareness. Awareness of how small we are in the face of the universe. How fragile our certainty. How incomplete our understanding. The less you know, the more confident you are. But the more you know, the more careful, humble, and open you become. The discomfort of growth. Wisdom doesn't always feel good. It often arrives with grief, with broken illusions, with a deep sigh that says, "I see now, and I wish I didn't." Because the wiser you become, the more pain you've likely faced, the more systems you've watched crumble, the more people you've forgiven or lost. Wisdom doesn't come from answers. It comes from living the questions long enough to know that many don't need solving. They just need holding. The gentle confidence of the wise. There's a quiet energy to the truly wise. They don't speak to impress. They speak to connect. They don't tell you how to live. They ask how you're living. They don't posture. They presence themselves. Because they've learned that wisdom is not about being right. It's about being real. And the more real you become, the more you realize how little you actually control. But that's not scary. It's liberating. What this paradox teaches us. The wisdom paradox reminds us that knowledge is power, but wisdom is peace. Wisdom doesn't remove uncertainty. It makes you comfortable in it. It softens your edges. It humbles your voice. It grounds your presence. It says, "I don't know everything, and I don't have to." Because wisdom isn't about mastery over life. It's about intimacy with it. So the next time you feel unsure, don't run. Don't hide behind answers. Pause and listen. Because that space of not knowing, that's where wisdom begins to grow. Paradox 16, the happiness pursuit paradox. The harder you chase happiness, the further it drifts away. You want to feel better, so you make a plan. Gratitude journals, morning routines, books, courses, affirmations. You set goals. You set intentions. You visualize the life you want. And for a moment, you feel in control. But somewhere along the way, you start to feel tired, restless, behind. You keep doing everything right. But happiness still feels just out of reach. Like chasing a shadow on the wall. The closer you run, the more it disappears. This is the happiness pursuit paradox. The strange truth that the more urgently we seek happiness, the more anxious and empty we can become. Because the chase itself tells your mind, what I have now is not enough. Who I am now is not enough. And that belief quietly poisons the moment. The myth of arrival. We're taught that happiness lies at the end of effort. Once you fix your past, or change your job, or heal your heart. Then you'll be happy. But this myth creates an emotional finish line that keeps moving. You achieve the goal, and the joy fades. You check the box, and your brain asks, what's next? This is hedonic adaptation. Our tendency to return to a baseline no matter what changes. It's not failure. It's how our minds protect us from stagnation. But it means that external achievement alone can never sustain internal fulfillment. Happiness as a side effect. The more you chase happiness directly, the more it slips away. But the moments where joy sneaks in, they're rarely planned. They happen when you're not trying. A deep breath on a cold morning. A laugh you didn't expect. A conversation where you finally felt safe. These moments weren't on your to-do list. They arrived when you stopped controlling and started living. Because happiness isn't something you earn. It's something you notice. Letting go of the chase. What if the goal isn't to feel happy all the time? What if the goal is to become whole? To make space for sadness? To honor confusion? To love yourself through the in-between? When you allow the full range of life, joy becomes a guest, not a reward. And you stop asking, how can I feel better? And start asking, can I feel everything and be okay with that? What this paradox teaches us. The happiness pursuit paradox is a reminder that happiness isn't at the top of a mountain. It's in the dirt beneath your feet. It's in your breath, in your ability to be with your life, instead of constantly escaping it. And often, the moment you stop chasing happiness is the moment it quietly walks in, not with fireworks, but with presence. So the next time you feel like joy is missing, pause. Look around. Look within. Ask, what am I running from that joy might be hiding inside of? Because maybe you don't need to search for happiness. You just need to stop running from the moment you're already in. Paradox 17, the letting go paradox. The moment you stop needing it is when it arrives. You've tried everything. You've prayed, planned, pushed, held on. To the relationship, the dream, the healing, the outcome. You've told yourself, if I just try harder, it'll happen. But it doesn't. And at some point, your hands grow tired, your heart grows heavy, and you whisper the words you never wanted to say. I can't do this anymore. And then, in that stillness, it shows up. The clarity, the peace, the release, the thing you've been chasing. This is the letting go paradox. The soul deep truth that when you finally stop grasping, what you longed for often finds its way to you. Not because you stopped caring, but because you stopped clinging. The grip that pushes away. There's a strange energy to neediness. The tighter you hold something, the more you push it away. Love, creativity, healing, joy. These things don't respond to pressure. They respond to space, to invitation, to openness. Letting go isn't about giving up. It's about stepping aside. So what's meant for you can finally come in. When you release the outcome, we often chase results as a way to feel safe. We think, if I can control this, then I'll be okay. But life rarely cooperates with control. And the more we force it, the more we suffer. But when we release the outcome, when we act with intention and let the results unfold, something shifts. We begin to receive instead of chase, flow instead of force, allow instead of control. The paradox of surrender. Letting go doesn't mean apathy. It means alignment. It means you trust that you've done enough, that you are enough, that life doesn't need to be micromanaged to be meaningful. And in that trust, the universe begins to move differently. People feel safer around you. Ideas flow more freely. Peace begins to settle in. Because you're no longer reaching from a place of lack. You're welcoming from a place of wholeness. What this paradox teaches us. The letting go paradox is the final reflection. It teaches us that clinging is not love. That pressure is not clarity. And that sometimes, the most powerful move is to open your hands and let go. Not because you've lost hope, but because you've gained trust. In life. In timing. In yourself. So the next time you find yourself holding on too tightly to a person, a goal, a version of yourself, pause. Ask, what am I afraid would happen if I simply let go? And what might arrive only if I do? Because maybe the life you want isn't waiting on more effort. It's waiting on your surrender. Paradox 18, the Crocodile Paradox, when logic bites back. It begins, as many stories do, with desperation. A mother stands at the edge of a swamp, her breath trembling, her eyes scanning the water. Somewhere out there, hidden in the stillness, is her child. Taken. Suddenly, from the reeds, it rises. Not a monster, not a myth, but something far stranger. A crocodile. Ancient. Cold. Unblinking. And then, it speaks. Not with words you or I would hear, but with the calm, deliberate voice of logic itself. If you can guess what I will do next, I will return your child. But if your guess is wrong, I will keep them forever. The mother, her soul collapsing under the weight of that ultimatum, whispers, "You will not return my child." The crocodile stares back. Silent. Still. And suddenly, the air splits with tension. Because now, the creature is trapped. But not by chains. By logic. A paradox emerges. If the crocodile was going to return the child and the mother guessed he wouldn't, then she guessed incorrectly. Which means, he must keep the child. But if the crocodile was going to keep the child and she correctly predicted it, then he must give the child back, because she guessed correctly. Now he's caught. Every path contradicts. Every answer cancels itself out. A loop, without escape. And just like that, we fall into the jaws of the crocodile paradox. This ancient riddle isn't just about a reptile and a child. It's about the edges of logic, the places where reason begins to eat itself. It's a self-referential paradox. A snake biting its own tail, where truth becomes unstable the moment it tries to reference itself. But why does this matter? What does a riddle from centuries ago have to do with us, with you, today? Far more than you might think. Because the crocodile lives in more than rivers. It lives in algorithms, in courtrooms, in politics, in war, in every system built on conditional promises, where truth is held hostage by outcome, and sometimes, by power. Classical building logic versus justice. In modern philosophy, the crocodile paradox mirrors the problem of conditional logic in moral dilemmas. For example, imagine a dictator says to a prisoner, "If you predict correctly whether I'll execute you tomorrow, I'll set you free. But if you're wrong, you die." Now the prisoner is trapped. Just like the mother. Because now, the answer determines the outcome, and the outcome invalidates the answer. It's logic turned into punishment. And suddenly, reason becomes a weapon. We see this in courtrooms, too. When a defendant pleads guilty in exchange for leniency, even if they're innocent. Or when someone is penalized for answering truthfully because that answer incriminates them. Think of whistleblowers. Think of truth-tellers punished not for lying, but for being right. The crocodile doesn't care whether you're honest. It cares if your honesty changes its outcome. And in systems like that, truth becomes dangerous. Robot face the algorithmic trap. But let's go deeper. Let's zoom into the world we're building now. Imagine an AI trained to detect fraud. It predicts someone is lying not based on evidence, but on behavioral patterns. Now that person learns to change their behavior to avoid being flagged. The AI adapts. The person adapts again. Soon, both are trapped in a loop, constantly predicting each other's predictions. Sound familiar? This is the crocodile paradox in digital form. A feedback loop where prediction eats itself. Even in machine learning, this paradox shows up as an edge case. If an AI's future behavior is conditional on its prediction of your future behavior, and your behavior changes because of what you expect the AI to do, who's really in control? You? The algorithm? Neither. It's the illusion of choice, wrapped in recursive logic. And once again, the crocodile is there. Watching. performing arts paradox in human behavior. But what if we strip away the science? What if we bring the crocodile home into our own minds? Ever tell someone, "I know exactly what you're going to do next"? Now they face a choice. Do they act to prove you wrong, which means, you were right? Or do they do what they were going to do, which means you knew them better than they admitted? Either way, they're boxed in. This is the crocodile paradox in relationships, where knowing someone deeply enough feels like control, and being known too well feels like entrapment. Sometimes, we act against our own instincts just to feel free. The paradox is this: even truth, even certainty, even prediction can be experienced as a threat, not because it's wrong, but because it robs us of the illusion of freedom. And the more we try to guess what others will do, the more we distort the very outcome we're trying to predict. Self-fulfilling traps. This paradox shows up in psychology, too. When someone believes they'll be rejected, they act distant. Their distance causes rejection, which validates their fear. Now they say, "See, I was right all along." But were they? Or did they just feed the loop? This is how self-fulfilling prophecies are born. You predict pain, so you act defensively, which causes the pain. And you say, "I knew it." The crocodile smiles. Chart with downward trend trust, lies, and loops. The crocodile paradox doesn't just expose logical contradiction, it exposes relational contradiction. It forces us to ask, if trust is conditional on outcomes, can it ever be real? If love depends on guessing the right thing, is it still love? What happens when being right means you have to suffer, or when telling the truth only gets you hurt? In life, sometimes the honest answer costs you the thing you were honest about. The crocodile doesn't need teeth when the truth can do the damage for him. Left pointing magnifying glass, the larger lesson. So where does this leave us? At a philosophical riverbank, caught between the water and the wild. The crocodile paradox is more than a riddle. It's a mirror. It reflects our obsession with logic, even when logic fails us. It warns us of systems that punish prediction, that force people to play games of recursive reasoning, where the goalposts move based on your answer. And in that mirror, we also see ourselves. Because sometimes, we're the mother, desperate for clarity, grasping for justice, believing that logic will save us. And sometimes, we're the crocodile, powerful, silent, caught in our own rules. Final reflection. In a world addicted to prediction, from algorithms, to analytics, to astrology, the crocodile paradox whispers, be careful what you try to guess, because in trying to control the future, we may lose the present. In trying to outsmart the system, we may become trapped in its jaws. And in trying to be right, we may forfeit what truly matters. So what's the answer? What should the mother have said? What would you say? The truth is, there may be no escape. Just the unsettling realization that not all questions lead to freedom. Some lead to deeper cages. Paradox 19. The friendship paradox, why your friends are probably more popular than you. Let's begin with something that stings. Not violently, not openly, but subtly, like a quiet truth you always suspected but never proved. Look around your social circle, online or in real life. Chances are, most of your friends have more friends than you. That's not a joke. That's not insecurity talking. It's math. It's called the friendship paradox. And it turns out, it's not just true. It's true almost everywhere. Imagine a small network of people. Let's say you have 10 friends. You check their profiles, their interactions, their followers, and you notice something strange. On average, your friends are more connected than you. How is that possible? How can your friends be more popular than you, if you're the one connecting with them? Shouldn't popularity average out? No. Because in networks, especially social ones, popularity is disproportionately distributed. And the more connected someone is, the more likely you are to know them. This creates a bias. The popular people are overrepresented in your network. Because they're connected to everyone. It's like standing in a crowd and feeling small, but forgetting that you're standing in the crowd because you're connected to it. The paradox isn't just statistical, it's psychological, and its implications are haunting. Think of how this shows up on social media. You scroll, you compare, and you start to feel lesser. Everyone's doing better than you. Everyone's traveling. Everyone's succeeding. But here's the kicker. The people you're seeing more often are more connected. That's why you see them more. It's not that everyone is living better than you. It's that the connected ones dominate the feed. Their lives, filtered, optimized, curated, become the default backdrop of your reality. This isn't just fear of missing out. This is structural. Social media platforms amplify the friendship paradox by design, because the algorithm favors engagement. And engagement follows attention. And attention follows popularity. So yes, your friends seem more successful, because the system keeps showing you the ones who are. Now step away from the screen. Back into your own mind. The human brain was never designed for global comparison. We evolved in small groups. We compared ourselves to those around us, our peers, our neighbors, our families. We weren't meant to compare our lives to someone's highlight reel from across the globe. But now, you compare your home to someone else's mansion, your body to someone else's portfolio, your relationship to someone else's vacation. And worst of all, you compare your self-worth to their visible worth. Because connection has become a mirror, but the reflection is distorted. The friendship paradox doesn't just make you feel worse. It shapes your identity. When you're surrounded by people who seem more successful, more attractive, more popular, you begin to adjust your standards. You aim higher, or you give up. But either way, your baseline shifts. You no longer ask, "Am I doing well?" You ask, "Am I doing as well as them?" And suddenly, your own achievements lose meaning. Because someone else's visibility becomes the measure of your value. In high school, this paradox hits hard. Everyone thinks everyone else has more friends, more fun, more experiences. Even the most popular kids think someone else is more popular. Because we measure ourselves by those who are visible, not those who are quiet. So the introverts, the artists, the thinkers fade from the equation. And the visible few become the distorted norm. We don't realize that everyone is looking at someone else thinking, "They're doing better than me." It's a hall of mirrors, with no center. So how do we fix it? We can't. Not entirely. Because the friendship paradox is a property of networks. It's not a glitch. It's inherent. But we can change how we see it. Because the truth is, you might have fewer connections, but deeper ones. You might not be the most popular, but you may be the most trusted. You might not be visible to many, but you may be vital to a few. And that matters more than you think. In science, the friendship paradox has been used to detect epidemics early. Researchers realized that monitoring well-connected individuals helps track outbreaks faster because they're more likely to be exposed. In other words, the paradox isn't just a curiosity. It's a tool. It's also been used in network design, social engineering, and even surveillance. Because the most connected nodes in a system determine the behavior of the whole. But this creates another trap. Systems become obsessed with the hubs and ignore the edges. But often, it's the quiet ones at the margins who hold the most insight. Not the loudest, not the most visible, but the ones watching, the ones thinking. The friendship paradox doesn't just expose a quirk in our social graphs. It reveals something deeper. We are wired to mistake visibility for value. We are conditioned to believe that popularity equals importance. We overestimate the lives of others and underestimate our own. And that comparison kills us slowly. It robs us of joy, of gratitude, of perspective. Because when your yardstick is someone else's highlight reel, you will never measure up. So what can you do? You pause. You zoom out. You remember this. The average of your friends is not the measure of your worth. You create space for silence. In a world screaming for connection, You cherish the unseen conversations, the quiet gestures, the one friend who shows up even if you're not tagged in their stories. Because depth matters more than reach. And presence means more than performance. The friendship paradox whispers, "You are smaller than you think." But it's lying. Because the paradox only counts connections, not compassion. It counts reach, not realness. And in a world obsessed with numbers, you are more than a node. You are a soul. So yes, your friends may be more connected. But that doesn't make you less. It simply means you're connected to something greater. And that isn't a paradox. That's the truth. Paradox 20. The tolerance paradox, when tolerance demands intolerance. It begins with a question that sounds noble. Should we tolerate everything? All beliefs? All behaviors? All people? Tolerance feels like a virtue. It feels like progress. It feels like enlightenment. It feels like the answer to conflict. But what happens when tolerance is extended to those who are intolerant? When people use freedom to dismantle the very freedom that protects them, suddenly, the ground shakes. The walls tremble. And the question becomes a trap. This is the tolerance paradox. And it changes everything. The philosopher Karl Popper introduced the term in 1945. In his book The Open Society and Its Enemies, he warned, "Unlimited tolerance must lead to the disappearance of tolerance. Because if a society is tolerant without limit, then the tolerant are eventually destroyed by the intolerant. And once the intolerant have the power, tolerance dies with them." It's counterintuitive. Because tolerance, by definition, means acceptance of difference, of discomfort, of disagreement. But what happens when that tolerance is used as a weapon? When hate hides behind free speech? When violence dresses in the robes of liberty? Should we tolerate that too? If we do, we risk giving power to those who will use it to silence others. If we don't, we risk becoming intolerant ourselves. It's a no-win scenario. A moral loop. A paradox. This isn't hypothetical. History has answered this question brutally. In 1930s Germany, a tolerant society allowed an intolerant ideology to rise, one that weaponized free speech, targeted minorities, and ultimately, crushed democracy. The Nazis used freedom to destroy freedom. By the time the tolerant fought back, it was too late. Tolerance had been too slow, too cautious, too trusting. And the cost was catastrophic. So where do we draw the line? Who decides what is too intolerant to be tolerated? Is it the government? The majority? The media? And what happens when the power to silence is abused? Now we're deep in the paradox. If we tolerate intolerance, we empower it. If we suppress it, we risk becoming what we despise. So we walk a tightrope. Too tolerant, and we invite our own destruction. Too intolerant, and we risk authoritarianism. This is not just about nations or laws. It's about relationships, communities, families. What do you do when someone in your life believes something hateful? Do you cut them off? Call them out? Try to understand? Is silence complicity? Or is confrontation escalation? Sometimes, choosing when to speak and when not to feels like trying to defuse a bomb with your eyes closed. And the most dangerous part? Both action and inaction can cause it to explode. The tolerance paradox reveals something uncomfortable. Being kind isn't always enough. Being open isn't always wise. Because some ideas don't want to coexist. They want to conquer. They don't seek dialogue. They seek domination. And giving them space doesn't make you virtuous. It makes you vulnerable. But the paradox also warns against becoming reactionary. Because when we ban too broadly, label too quickly, cancel too easily, we risk silencing difference, not just danger. We risk protecting our comfort, instead of defending our values. And in doing so, we erode the very spirit of tolerance we claim to uphold. So how do we survive the paradox? We learn to distinguish between disagreement and destruction. Between ideas that challenge us, and those that seek to erase us. Tolerance does not mean agreement. It means restraint. But restraint has limits. The moment someone threatens the rights of others, they forfeit the protections those rights offer. A free society must draw lines. Not to punish thought, but to protect peace. Not to silence debate, but to defend dignity. It's easy to preach tolerance when everyone is kind. It's harder when they are cruel. It's easy to be open-minded until someone threatens your family. It's harder to keep the door open when you know what might come through it. And yet, that is the burden of a civilized world. To hold space for difference, without surrendering to destruction. To stand firm, without becoming rigid. To say, you are free to speak, while also saying, but not to harm. Tolerance is not weakness. It is discipline. It is knowing when to listen, and when to shut the door. It is understanding that freedom of expression was never meant to be a shield for hate. It was meant to be a stage for ideas, not a platform for violence. So the paradox remains. To preserve tolerance, we must sometimes be intolerant. Not of people, but of cruelty, of supremacy, of ideologies that reject the humanity of others. Because if we allow intolerance to grow unchecked, it will not stop. It will not pause. It will not negotiate. It will consume. And tolerance will become a relic. A naive dream in the ruins of a society that waited too long to say no. The tolerance paradox asks us to be wise, to be watchful, to be brave, to know that loving freedom means protecting it, even when protection looks like resistance, even when resistance makes us uncomfortable, because silence in the face of intolerance is not neutrality, it is surrender, and tolerance deserves better than that. Paradox 21, the paradox of choice when more becomes less. Imagine standing in the middle of a vast supermarket aisle. Fluorescent lights humming above you. Shelves stretching endlessly in every direction. Row after row of cereal boxes, toothpaste brands, flavors of water, variations of the same thing. You just came for toothpaste. But now, you're frozen. Which one whitens better? Which one has fewer chemicals? Is organic better? Fluoride-free? Extra mint? You stare, paralyzed. And for a moment, you forget why you came at all. This, right here, is the paradox of choice. Because what we've been told is this. More choice means more freedom. But the truth is subtler. And more sinister. More choice often leads to more anxiety, more regret, more pressure, and ironically, less satisfaction. Because sometimes, the more options you have, the less you want any of them. It's easy to believe that freedom comes from having endless options, that the open world, the infinite scroll, the always connected screen means we're in control. But we rarely stop to ask, what is the cost of choosing? Not the cost of making the wrong choice, but the cost of choosing itself. Because the more we choose, the more we fear choosing wrong. And the more we fear, the more we hesitate. Until the freedom we were promised starts to feel like a trap. The psychologist Barry Schwartz wrote a book titled The Paradox of Choice. He warned, autonomy and freedom of choice are critical to our well-being. And choice is essential to freedom. But, when there are too many options to choose from, people find it difficult to choose at all. It turns out, we aren't wired for endless options. We're wired for clarity, for constraint, for meaning. Because while options provide flexibility, they also demand something in return. Responsibility. And with too many options, responsibility becomes unbearable. Think about it. When you have only two choices, the consequences are contained. You weigh, you decide, you move on. But when you have 100 choices, every decision becomes a referendum on your identity. What kind of person am I if I choose this over that? What will others think? What will I think of myself? And then, even after the decision is made, regret creeps in. Because you start to imagine the other roads you could have taken. The parallel lives you might have lived. The better version of this reality that you might have missed. That toothpaste aisle? Now it's a metaphor for your life. Your job. your relationship, your city, your beliefs. So many doors, so many paths, and only one life to walk them. This is the shadow side of freedom. We were told, if we can do anything, we will be happy. But we weren't told how much happiness depends on limiting our focus, on committing, on letting go of the illusion that we can have it all. Because choice is not just an opportunity, it's a responsibility, and it can become a burden. And then there's the curse of comparison. Once we choose, we compare, not just what we chose, but what we didn't. And in that comparison, even good things feel mediocre. Because when everything is possible, nothing feels special. You order a meal from a giant menu and it's good, but not great. And suddenly, you regret it. Not because it was bad, but because maybe that other thing would have been perfect. This isn't logic. It's emotion. It's psychology. It's the creeping feeling that you're missing out even when you have something good. That's the paradox. Choice should liberate us. But sometimes, it imprisons us. Not in chains, but in doubt. Because the more choices we face, the more we question if we chose well. And the more we question, the more we suffer. We see this everywhere. In dating apps, where endless swiping means people never settle. In careers, where fear of the wrong path leads to years of paralysis. In streaming services, where people scroll longer than they watch. Even in spirituality, where the abundance of belief systems can lead to skepticism of all. And in this world of limitless options, commitment becomes rebellion. Focus becomes freedom. Saying no becomes more powerful than saying yes. So what's the answer? Not fewer options, but better filters. A clearer sense of self. A stronger foundation of values. A willingness to accept that no path is perfect, but some paths are worth walking. Because the opposite of freedom isn't constraint. It's chaos. And in a chaotic world, simplicity is a gift. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is choose and not look back. The paradox of choice reminds us that freedom isn't just about options. It's about meaning. And meaning comes from choosing not just what we want, but what we're willing to give up. Not just what we gain, but what we're ready to let go. You don't need 1,000 paths to live a good life. You need one. Walked with purpose, with intention, and with peace in your heart even if the other doors remain closed. Because freedom isn't in choosing everything, it's in knowing why you chose what you did. Paradox 22, the value paradox, why the things that matter most can't be measured. There's a strange silence that follows success. Not the kind that comes from rest, but the kind that comes from realization. You achieve the goal. You earn the title. You get the thing you worked so hard for. And then you ask yourself, why doesn't it feel like enough? This is the value paradox. It lives in the gap between what we can measure and what we actually care about. Because the things that are easiest to count, money, likes, followers, test scores, status, are rarely the things that matter most. And the things that matter most, love, trust, peace, meaning, are rarely the things we know how to count. We live in a quantified world. A world of spreadsheets and scoreboards, metrics and performance reviews, dashboards, charts, ratings, grades. And in this world, we're taught early on. If it can't be measured, it can't be managed. If it can't be tracked, it doesn't exist. If it doesn't produce an outcome, it has no value. But what happens when the most important parts of being human can't be boxed into numbers? What happens when the things we crave the most are invisible? Imagine two parents. One gives their child expensive gifts. The other gives their time. One buys more. The other listens more. Which one is showing more love? You can't measure it. There's no metric for presence. No chart for warmth. No rating system for emotional safety. But we feel it. We know it. Because value isn't always visible. Sometimes, it's found in what remains unspoken. In what's consistent. In what doesn't scream for recognition. Think of grief. You lose someone you love. The world gives you time off, 2 days, maybe 3. But how do you measure a loss? by years, by depth, by the hole it leaves. Grief doesn't fit into a calendar. It doesn't expire on command. And yet, we try to quantify it. We try to turn pain into something we can file away. But the most real things we feel, heartbreak, awe, wonder, exist beyond the reach of numbers. And the value paradox asks, what happens when we stop seeing what we can't count? This paradox infects our education system. Students are tested, graded, ranked. But curiosity isn't on the exam. Kindness isn't part of the score. Resilience doesn't show up on the transcript. So we raise people to chase scores, not understanding. We praise the measurable and neglect the meaningful. And then we wonder why the system feels so empty. In relationships, it's no different. We ask, how often do you text me? How much time do you spend with me? What did you do for me lately? But we don't ask, did you think of me when no one was watching? Did you stand by me when I was hard to love? The things that sustain love can't be tallied. They're whispered, lived, felt. But they're invisible to systems that demand metrics. In business, we chase KPIs, key performance indicators. We measure profits, conversions, retention rates. But we can't measure meaning. We can't graph dignity. We can't quantify purpose. A company might be profitable, but soul-crushing. A product might be popular, but destructive. A leader might be effective, but cruel. And if the system only sees numbers, it won't see people. That's the value paradox. The map becomes the territory. The score becomes the story. And we forget what we were measuring in the first place. So what's the danger? It's subtle. It's not that metrics are evil. It's that they become addictive. Once you can measure something, you can compare it. Once you can compare it, you can rank it. Once you can rank it, you can compete with it. And now your worth becomes a number. Not a life. Not a soul. Not a unique, irreplaceable experience. Just a score. And in that moment, you begin to live for the numbers. Not for the moments between them. Think about social media. We post not just to share, but to be seen. We track likes, followers, views. And what happens when a moment of genuine beauty gets less engagement than a curated photo? We question the value of the moment itself. We start to confuse what is visible with what is valuable. But that's a lie. Because not everything that counts can be counted. And not everything that's counted should count. The value paradox is a warning. A whisper in a noisy world that says, don't confuse price with worth. Don't confuse appearance with substance. Don't confuse attention with affection. And most of all, don't let a number define your life. So what's the way out? It begins with awareness. With asking, why do I value what I value? Who told me this was important? What am I measuring, and what am I ignoring? And then, it continues with courage. The courage to define success on your own terms. To love without proof. To live without applause. To pursue meaning even when it doesn't show up on a resume. Maybe the best things in life don't show up in the data. Maybe the moments that matter most are the ones no one else sees. The quiet acts of kindness. The silent struggles. The internal victories. The private joys. And maybe, that's what makes them sacred. Because they're not for display. They're for you. Unmeasurable. Uncountable. Unmistakably real. The value paradox doesn't ask us to stop measuring. It asks us to remember what can't be measured. To see beyond the score. To feel beyond the metric. To choose substance over surface. Because in the end, a number might impress the world. But only meaning will satisfy the soul. Paradox 23. The paradox of thrift. When saving too much can ruin everything. We're told from childhood, save your money. Be careful. Don't spend what you don't need. Always prepare for the future. It sounds like wisdom. It sounds responsible. It sounds like the cornerstone of personal stability. And for the individual, it is. But scale it up to an entire economy. To an entire population. to a society where everyone, all at once, decides to spend less and save more. And suddenly, what was once virtue becomes collapse. This is the paradox of thrift. When what is wise for one person becomes dangerous when everyone does it at the same time. Imagine a family deciding to save money. They cut back on restaurants, skip vacations, buy fewer clothes, delay the new car. Their savings go up. Their debt goes down. They feel safer, smarter. But then, the restaurant sees fewer customers. The airline sells fewer tickets. The factory that makes clothes gets fewer orders. The car dealership watches its inventory grow dusty. Jobs get cut. Hours get slashed. Incomes fall. And soon, that family's decision to save, which helped them, contributes to a larger system that hurts everyone. Now imagine 10,000 families making the same choice. 1 million. A nation. And the economy begins to contract. This is the heart of the paradox. In economics, it's a feedback loop. People spend less, businesses earn less, businesses hire less people, earn less, people spend less. Down and down it goes. A cycle of caution that turns into crisis. And the cruel irony, the more people try to protect themselves, the more they contribute to the very collapse they fear. The paradox of thrift was first described in the 1930s by economist John Maynard Keynes in the aftermath of the Great Depression. He observed, when everyone hoards cash, the economy dries up. And when the economy dries up, it doesn't matter how much money you saved. Because the job is gone. The market has stalled. The value of your savings may drop. Or the thing you were saving for may no longer be available. Your prudence, multiplied across a population, became poison. It's counterintuitive. We assume that what's good for the individual must be good for the group. But the paradox of thrift shatters that assumption. It shows us that systems behave differently than the parts that make them up. That rational behavior on the micro level can lead to irrational outcomes on the macro level. And once you see this, you start to notice it everywhere. Think about trust. If one person becomes more guarded, careful with their secrets, selective with their words, it may protect them. But if everyone becomes guarded, connection dies. And trust collapses. Think about teamwork. If one person in a group holds back effort, saving energy for their own tasks, they feel efficient. But if everyone holds back, the project fails. The team falls apart. No one wins. It's the same dynamic, again and again. What works for one, fails for many. And that's the trap. Because the more uncertain the world feels, the more we retreat into our savings, into our routines, into our shells. We shrink our risk. We hoard our energy. We wait. But systems only work when people step forward, when they spend, connect, trust, give. A society cannot run on fear. It runs on flow. And flow of money, of time, of attention requires courage. So what's the solution? Do we just spend endlessly? Do we abandon thrift altogether? Of course not. The paradox of thrift isn't a rejection of saving. It's a reminder of balance. It asks, when is saving smart? And when is it self-defeating? It challenges us to see the context. Because saving during prosperity helps build resilience. But saving during a downturn can deepen the downturn. It's not about the act, it's about the timing, the scale, the system. Governments understand this, or at least, they should. This is why, during recessions, we hear about stimulus, public spending, tax cuts, cash infusions. Because the system needs motion. It needs confidence. It needs someone to go first. To spend when others are saving. To hire when others are firing. To believe when others are doubting. Only then does the cycle reverse. But this isn't just about policy. It's about mindset. We are, by nature, cautious creatures. We cling to what we have. We protect our own. We hunker down in uncertainty. But if everyone does that, nothing moves. Progress halts. Trust fades. Growth stops. And fear becomes prophecy. The paradox of thrift is a mirror. It forces us to ask, are we protecting? Or are we participating? Are we saving? Or are we shrinking? And more than that, are we acting alone? Or as part of something greater? Because what we do, multiplied across millions, becomes the economy, becomes the community, becomes the culture. And the only way to build something better is to show up, even when it's uncomfortable. Yes, save. Yes, be wise. Yes, plan. But remember, a world without generosity is a world without growth. And a life lived entirely in caution is a life half-lived. Sometimes, to preserve the system, you have to let go of control. You have to risk. You have to spend. You have to believe, not just in yourself, but in the shared promise of movement. Because money is just one kind of currency. Time, energy, attention, love. They all follow the same rule. If everyone hoards them, everyone loses. Paradox 24. The stability-instability paradox. When peace makes war more likely, it begins not with the sound of explosions, but with silence. The kind of silence that stretches for years, decades. Borders are respected. Treaties are signed. Leaders shake hands in front of cameras. And the world breathes easier. But beneath the stillness, something strange is happening. Not conflict. Not collapse. But calculation. Because when war becomes too dangerous to wage, small conflicts become easier to justify. This is the stability-instability paradox. And it changes how we understand war, peace, and everything in between. At its core, the paradox says this. When two powerful forces know that all-out war would be devastating, they avoid it. That's stability. But that same fear of total war makes smaller conflicts more likely, because each side assumes the other won't escalate. So while nuclear powers avoid nuclear war, they engage in proxy wars, cyber attacks, political sabotage, covert operations. The shadow battles increase, not despite peace, but because of it. Stability at the top leads to instability at the bottom. This paradox emerged during the Cold War. The US and the Soviet Union, both armed with nuclear weapons, knew that a direct confrontation could end life on Earth. So they avoided it. They never launched against each other directly, but they fought anyway. In Korea, in Vietnam, in Afghanistan, in Cuba, in secret. Each side supported opposing factions, funded insurgents, toppled governments. They stayed stable on the surface. But the instability spread everywhere else. Today, the same dynamic continues. Nations with massive firepower don't fight directly, but they pull strings, launch drones, hack systems, manipulate elections. It's less visible, less explosive, but no less dangerous. Because the paradox whispers, as long as no one pushes the big red button, everything else is fair game. But this isn't just about politics or global strategy. This paradox shows up in relationships, companies, teams, families. Think about it. In a deeply committed marriage, neither partner wants to risk divorce. That's the nuclear option. So instead, they argue over the small things. They avoid the big issues. They dance around the real conflict. Stability, the fear of breaking everything, keeps the relationship intact. But underneath, resentments grow, tensions simmer, and eventually, a quiet war unfolds. In a business, two departments may avoid open confrontation. Everyone wants to keep the peace. So instead of honest disagreement, they send passive-aggressive emails. They hold back information. They sabotage each other subtly. It's stable, until it isn't. Because the fear of large-scale failure doesn't eliminate conflict. It just changes its shape. That's the hidden danger of forced peace. It creates the illusion of harmony. But suppressing tension doesn't resolve it. It redistributes it. And over time, that tension finds new ways to erupt. It's why some of the most stable workplaces are filled with quiet toxicity. It's why some of the nicest families hide the deepest pain. Because avoiding big fights doesn't mean you're safe. Sometimes, it means the war has simply gone underground. The stability-instability paradox teaches us something uncomfortable. True peace is not the absence of conflict. It's the presence of honest engagement. It's confrontation with compassion. Disagreement without destruction. Speaking up without fear of collapse. If you avoid all conflict, you invite indirect harm. Because what can't be spoken, gets acted out. And what isn't expressed, becomes distorted. So what's the solution? It's not constant confrontation. It's not chaos. It's structured courage. The willingness to face discomfort directly before it metastasizes. The discipline to have hard conversations early instead of pretending everything's fine. It's transparency, vulnerability, boundaries. Not weapons, but safeguards. Because without them, stability is just a thin layer of ice, covering a lake of unresolved tension. And all it takes is one wrong step. In geopolitics, this paradox means we must rethink diplomacy. It's not enough to avoid war. We must also dismantle the systems that feed low-level conflict. The propaganda, the economic pressure, the exploitation of the weak by the strong. Because peace without justice is just quiet oppression. And over time, even silence becomes a scream. The paradox also applies to leadership. A CEO who avoids tough decisions to keep the team stable may create a fragile culture. One that's afraid of change, afraid of challenge, afraid of truth. Real stability requires flexibility, adaptation, resilience. It requires the humility to admit tension and the wisdom to work through it, not around it. The stability-instability paradox asks us, are we calm, or are we numb? Are we peaceful, or just repressed? Are we avoiding conflict, or avoiding growth? Because without pressure, diamonds aren't formed. But with too much pressure, even steel snaps. Balance matters. So the next time you find yourself in a stable situation, look deeper. Ask yourself, is this peace? Or paralysis? Is this calm? Or concealment? Because the absence of conflict doesn't guarantee health. Sometimes, it means the system is afraid to breathe. And if no one speaks, the silence becomes a lie. Real peace is messy. It includes disagreement. It requires courage. Because conflict isn't the opposite of peace. It's often the doorway to it. If you walk through it with grace, you might find a stronger, truer calm on the other side. But if you avoid it forever, you're not building peace. You're just delaying the war. Paradox 25, the hedonism paradox, why chasing pleasure can make you miserable. We live in the age of more comfort, more stimulation, more choices, more indulgence. At the tap of a screen, you can summon a meal, a movie, a match, a package, a dopamine hit. The world has never been more convenient. And yet, it's never felt so empty. We chase pleasure, but it runs faster. We want to feel good, but the more we want it, the less it lasts. This is the hedonism paradox. The strange truth that the more we pursue pleasure as the ultimate goal, the less pleasure we actually get. At first, it sounds wrong. Why wouldn't pleasure make us happier? Isn't that the point of life, to feel good? To enjoy ourselves? To escape pain? We eat what tastes good. We watch what excites us. We scroll until our brains are numb. And for a moment, we feel satisfied. But the feeling fades. And we reach again. And again. Until we're no longer seeking joy. We're just avoiding discomfort. And that is not the same thing. The philosopher John Stuart Mill once said, "Those only are happy who have their minds fixed on something other than their own happiness." And he was right. Because happiness is not found in its pursuit. It's found in what we're doing while we forget to look for it. It's a side effect, not a destination. And when we chase it directly, obsessively, it slips through our fingers. Like trying to hold water in a clenched fist. The hedonism paradox shows up everywhere. You plan the perfect vacation. The beach. The food. The freedom. But once you're there, you're anxious. Checking emails. Thinking of home. Comparing it to the last trip. And you wonder, why aren't you happy? Because pleasure isn't just about where you are. It's about how present you are. And the more you try to force it, the more it resists. In relationships, we chase passion, excitement, validation. We want to be seen, desired, chosen. But if we chase the feeling instead of the connection, we burn through people like matches. Each one gives light, until it's gone. And we wonder why the spark never lasts. Because love is not found in constant stimulation. It's found in commitment, in trust, in growth. And those things aren't always pleasurable, at least not at first. In daily life, we scroll, we binge, we snack, we numb. We are surrounded by pleasure, but starved of meaning. Because pleasure without purpose is a sugar high. It spikes, it crashes, and you're left more hollow than before. There's a name for this cycle: hedonic adaptation. It means we get used to pleasure quickly. What thrilled us yesterday becomes boring today, and what excites us now will be dull tomorrow. So we increase the dosage. Buy more, watch more, consume more, but we never arrive. Because the target keeps moving. Pleasure becomes a treadmill. You run, but go nowhere. So what's the way out? It's not rejection of pleasure. It's redefinition. It's learning that pleasure is not the goal, but a signal. A sign that we're in alignment with something deeper. When you create, when you connect, when you grow, pleasure follows. Not because you chased it, but because you did something meaningful. You served. You expressed. You overcame. Pleasure is the echo, not the song. This is why some of the happiest people aren't chasing fun. They're chasing something bigger than themselves. A cause, a craft, a child, a belief. And in that chase, they feel joy. Not the loud, flashy kind, but the steady kind. The kind that lingers, that grounds, that fills you not just for a moment, but for a lifetime. The paradox is clear. The more you chase pleasure for its own sake, the more elusive it becomes. But when you pursue truth, when you embrace challenge, when you live with purpose, pleasure meets you there, quietly, unexpectedly, like a friend who shows up. Not when you call them, but when you need them most. So go ahead, enjoy the good things. Savor them. Celebrate them. But don't build your life around them. Because joy is not found in escape. It's found in presence. In wholeness. In choosing what matters even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Because the good life isn't the easy life. It's the honest one. And that is worth everything. Paradox 26. The Sorites Paradox. When small things become big, without you noticing. Imagine holding a single grain of sand in your hand. It's tiny, insignificant, forgettable. Now add another, then another, and another. At what point does it become a pile? Is it after 10 grains? 50? 100? When does not a pile turn into a pile? It's a simple question, and yet, it has no clear answer. This is the Sorites Paradox. A problem so small, it sneaks past your logic. A problem so subtle, it challenges how we define anything at all. Sorites comes from the Greek word for heap. And the paradox is this. If removing one grain of sand from a heap doesn't stop it from being a heap, and if this is true for every grain, then by removing one grain at a time, we could remove them all and still call it a heap. Until suddenly, we're holding nothing. No grains. No pile. And yet, somehow, we never crossed the line. Where did the pile go? And more importantly, when did it stop being one? This isn't just a riddle for philosophers. It's a mirror for how we live. Because most changes in life don't come all at once. They come slowly, incrementally, quietly, and then, they're everything. A habit, repeated daily. A compromise, made weekly. A truth, ignored monthly. One grain at a time. Until one day, you look back, and you're not who you were. Think about your health. You skip one workout, then another. You eat one unhealthy meal, then two. You sleep late. You stop stretching. None of it feels like a crisis. It's just a day, just a choice. But over time, the body changes. The energy drops. The mirror reflects someone different. And you wonder, how did this happen? The answer, grain by grain. The same is true in relationships. You stop texting first. You avoid a conversation. You keep a small secret. You miss one date night. Nothing dramatic. Nothing explosive. Just silence. Distraction. Neglect. And slowly, the intimacy fades. The connection weakens. The love becomes a memory. But there was no fight. No betrayal. Just a gradual erosion. Grain by grain. The Fermi Paradox is a warning about thresholds. About how blurry they are. About how easily we slide past them, without noticing. It's not just about heaps of sand. It's about identity. At what point does a person change? If I shave my beard, am I still me? If I lose my job, my memories, my beliefs, where is the line between who I was and who I've become? Where is the line between enough and too much? The paradox shows us there is no sharp line. And that is terrifying. But it's also liberating. Because it means change is possible. One grain at a time. If a heap can disappear, then it can reappear. If bad habits can build slowly, so can good ones. If love can fade quietly, so can it return. With quiet effort. A word. A gesture. A choice. Add a grain. And another. And another. Until the pile is back. This paradox lives in politics. No one says, today I became corrupt. It happens through rationalizations, compromises, small ethical bends. One vote, one lie, one silence. Until the system that once served the people serves itself, grain by grain. And then comes the question, at what point did democracy stop being democratic? There is no alarm. No single switch. Just erosion. And then realization. It lives in technology, too. A feature is added. A new camera. A new setting. A new app. Suddenly, your phone knows your face. Your patterns. Your preferences. And one day, it knows you better than you know yourself. But no one asked you. The surveillance crept in. Not with a bang, but with a whisper. Grain by grain. The Fermi Paradox reminds us. Change rarely feels like change. At least not while it's happening. We only see it in hindsight. When the pile is gone. Or when it's too tall to ignore. And the only way to stay aware is to pay attention to the small things. The daily choices. The micro decisions. Because what you repeat becomes who you are. So here's the truth. Everything matters. Not because every grain is powerful on its own, but because they add up. Not because every compromise is destructive, but because they accumulate. You don't become lost overnight. And you don't find your way in one leap. You drift. You wander. And eventually, you return. One decision at a time. So if you feel like you're far from where you meant to be, start small. Add a grain. Make the call. Write the page. Go for the walk. Tell the truth. You won't see the pile form immediately, but it will. And one day, you'll wake up standing on something you built. Quietly, patiently, purposefully, grain by grain. Paradox 27. The Ship of Theseus. Are you still you if everything changes? Picture this. An ancient ship sits in the harbor. Beautiful. Historic. Beloved. It once carried the hero Theseus across the seas. Over time, the wood begins to rot. One plank is replaced. Then another. And another. Years go by. Storms wear it down. Maintenance keeps it alive. Eventually, every piece of the ship has been replaced. Not one original plank remains. And now, the question. Is it still the same ship? This is the Ship of Theseus paradox. A riddle not about wood or sails, but about identity, about memory, about transformation, about the essence of who or what we truly are. At first, it seems simple. Of course it's the same ship. It's been maintained, preserved, cared for, right? But what if all the old planks were gathered, reassembled, into a second ship? Now there are two. One made of the original material. One made of continuous maintenance. Which one is the true Ship of Theseus? Or are both? Or neither? This paradox is ancient. And yet, it's more relevant now than ever. Because it applies not just to ships, but to us. Are you the same person you were 10 years ago? Your body has changed. Your beliefs have shifted. Your memories have faded. Your cells have turned over, nearly all of them. You've loved. You've lost. You've broken. You've healed. So, are you still you? Or are you a reconstruction of who you once were? The Ship of Theseus paradox confronts a terrifying idea. There may be no fixed self. No anchor. No essence. Just a story. Held together by continuity, not content. And yet, we feel like the same person. We look in the mirror and say, "That's me." Even if everything has changed. Even if we wouldn't recognize our former selves. Even if they wouldn't recognize us. This paradox appears everywhere. In relationships. When someone says, "You've changed." Are they wrong? Maybe not. But what did they expect? That you'd stay the same? That love, once built, never needed to be rebuilt? That who you were on day one would last forever? Maybe that's the real illusion. Because love, like identity, must evolve or die. It shows up in culture. When we argue over history, monuments, traditions. This is who we are. But is it? Or is it who we were? Nations rebuild. Communities shift. Values mature. Are we betraying the past? Or honoring the present? The Ship of Theseus says, you cannot preserve the whole without replacing the parts. And the longer you try to hold on to everything, the more the entire structure rots. In technology, it's even clearer. Companies rebuild their software constantly. Update after update. Version after version. Is it still the same program? Or just a new one wearing the same name? And what about our digital selves? Our profiles? Our photos? Our usernames? If our online presence changes more than our real life, which one is us? Or are both just ships, drifting in different oceans? The paradox also applies to grief. When you lose someone you love, you change. Not instantly, but slowly. Piece by piece. Your laugh returns, but it's different. You smile again, but something inside has shifted. People say, you're still you. But you know better. You've replaced parts of yourself just to stay afloat. Not because you wanted to, but because you had to. Grief rebuilds us. Without our permission. So what do we do with this paradox? Do we fear change? Do we mourn every piece that falls away? Or do we embrace the truth? That we are always changing. That identity isn't about holding on. It's about moving forward. That maybe, we are less like statues. And more like rivers. Same name. Same path. New water. Every moment. The Ship of Theseus is not about finding an answer. It's about learning to live with the question. To ask, what part of me must I let go of, so the whole can survive? What must I release, so I can remain? Maybe we are not defined by what stays the same, but by what we choose to carry forward. By how we rebuild, recommit, remember. And so, the next time you feel lost, ask yourself, not who am I, but who am I becoming? And let that be enough. Because identity isn't fixed. It's a ship. It moves. It creaks. It ages. It endures. And with every storm, every repair, every new plank, It tells a deeper story. Paradox 28, Catch 22, the trap with no exit. You're a soldier in a war you don't believe in. You're terrified. You want out. You've seen too much. So you go to your commanding officer and say, "I'm going insane." If you're insane, they'll pull you from combat. You'll be safe. Finally. But there's a problem. The very act of asking not to fly to avoid danger is considered rational. Only a sane person would try to escape a suicidal mission. And if you're sane, you have to keep flying. This is Catch 22, a paradox that traps you in a no-win loop. If you don't want to fight, you're sane and must fight. If you do want to fight, you're insane, but too insane to ask out. Either way, you're stuck. The term comes from Joseph Heller's novel Catch 22, set in the absurdity of World War II bureaucracy. But it has grown far beyond fiction. It now defines a special kind of madness in real life. A system where the rules contradict themselves. Where trying to escape proves you can't. Where logic becomes a prison. And sanity becomes a curse. You've probably been in a catch-22 without realizing it. Applying for jobs that require experience. But you can't get experience until someone hires you. Wanting to borrow money, but needing credit history to qualify. While credit history requires borrowed money to build. Needing confidence to speak up. But needing to speak up to build confidence. It's the feeling of being cornered by contradiction. The system demands you take action, while simultaneously punishing you for taking it. Catch-22 is more than a frustrating rule. It's a commentary on power. Because in every catch-22, there's someone who benefits from the trap. The institution. The bureaucracy. The authority. They get to define the rules. They get to declare who is fit, sane, ready, deserving. And you are stuck jumping through hoops. Fighting an invisible wall. Screaming into a logic that never listens. It shows up in healthcare. You need help for your mental health. But to get help, you need to prove you're suffering. But if you're strong enough to ask, you must be fine. So you go without treatment. Suffering, in silence. It shows up in poverty. You need assistance. But if you earn even a little, you're disqualified. So you're punished for progress. Forced to choose between survival and growth. And it shows up in justice. Want to prove your innocence? You need access to lawyers, resources, influence. But if you don't have those, you're stuck. You must defend yourself from a place of weakness. And when you fail, the system says, "See? You were guilty after all." It's not just unfair. It's infuriating. Because Catch-22 doesn't care about truth. It only cares about maintaining the loop. Even in relationships, this paradox appears. You want to be loved for who you are. But to be accepted, you feel like you must change. And once you change, you're no longer being loved for who you are. You're being loved for who you pretended to be. So what do? Stay authentic and risk rejection? Or conform and lose yourself? Either way, you lose. Catch-22 reveals something deeply human. We build systems to create order. But sometimes, those systems create absurdity. We create policies to protect people. But over time, those policies protect the system from the people. We try to make life fair, but end up creating mazes that no one can escape. And the worst part, we're told it's our fault if we get lost. So how do we break free? Sometimes, you don't. Sometimes, the only way out is to break the game. Refuse the terms. Refuse the question. Refuse the assumption that there is a right way to win. Catch-22 doesn't like that. It wants you to keep playing, keep trying, keep hoping. But when you see the loop for what it is, you can step back and decide to no longer justify yourself to a system that thrives on contradiction. This doesn't mean giving up. It means shifting the focus from winning their approval to reclaiming your clarity, from trying to escape the trap to recognizing it isn't yours to fix. Because you can't outsmart a paradox. You can only stop believing it holds your worth. Catch-22 is the laughter in the face of absurdity. It's the quiet act of rebellion. It's the choice to say, if I'm crazy for wanting peace, then I'll be crazy. Because sometimes, the only sane response to madness is to stop playing by its rules. Paradox 29, the Grand Hotel Paradox, when infinity becomes too full to handle. Imagine a hotel. It has an infinite number of rooms, not 1,000, not 1,000,000, but infinite. This is the Grand Hotel, a place where no matter how many guests arrive, there is always room. Until, one day, you're told it's completely full. Every single room, from room 1 to room infinity, is occupied. And yet, a new guest shows up. What now? The manager doesn't panic. Instead, they say, move the guest in room 1 to room 2. Move the guest in room 2 to room 3. Room 3 to room 4. And so on. Now room 1 is free. The new guest checks in. The hotel was full and still made space. Welcome to the Grand Hotel Paradox, also known as Hilbert's Paradox of the Infinite. A thought experiment so strange, it bends our idea of what's possible, and forces us to confront the logic and the madness of infinity. At first, it seems like a trick, a mathematical magic show. But the deeper you go, the more it reveals about life, about limits, about logic. Because infinity, though it sounds like freedom, brings with it problems you'd never expect. Let's say an infinite number of new guests arrive. Not 1, not 10, but infinite. How do you make room for them? You move each current guest to double their room number. Guest in room 1 goes to room 2, room 2 to room 4, room 3 to room 6, and so on. Now every odd-numbered room is empty, and you can fill those with the new guests. The hotel was full, but had room for an infinite number more. It breaks the brain, because we're taught to think of full as absolute. But infinity doesn't play by the rules of fullness. Now consider this. What if half the guests checked out? An infinite number leave. And yet, an infinite number remain. You've lost half the hotel, but somehow, it's still infinite. Does that make sense? Not to the human mind. Because infinity isn't just a big number. It's something else entirely. A concept beyond measurement. Beyond boundaries. Beyond common sense. So what does this have to do with real life? More than you might think. The Grand Hotel Paradox teaches us that infinite capacity doesn't mean no limitations. That you can have endless possibilities, and still face impossible decisions. That you can always add more, and yet never be complete. And that's where the metaphor becomes real. Think about your mind. You can hold infinite ideas, endless thoughts, but your attention, your time, your energy, they're finite. So you open room 1 to a new idea, push the old ones back, squeeze a thought out to make room for the next, and eventually, you feel full, overwhelmed, fragmented. Even if your curiosity is infinite, your focus is not. Just because more can fit, doesn't mean you should let more in. Now think about the internet. It is the Grand Hotel. There is always more content, more videos, more updates, more headlines. You never reach the end. You can scroll forever, and still miss something. And that missing, that sense that no matter how much you consume, you're always behind. It creates anxiety, an existential FOMO, the feeling of drowning in abundance. Because infinity overwhelms. It shows up in love, too. Modern dating tells us, there's always someone else. Swipe again. Match again. There's another person. Another possibility. An infinite menu of options. But too much choice can become no choice. Because the more doors you see, the harder it is to walk through any of them. You start to believe that perfection is just one swipe away. And so you never commit. Never root. Never stay. Infinity becomes loneliness. In art, it happens to creators. You can create endlessly. Write. Paint. Compose. But the paradox. You may never feel done. Because there's always another layer to add. Another revision. Another version. And so the work never ships. Never reaches the world. Infinite possibility becomes infinite procrastination. The Grand Hotel Paradox warns us. Just because you can add more, doesn't mean you should. Just because you're not technically full, doesn't mean you're not overwhelmed. And just because something is infinite, doesn't mean it's always useful. So what's the answer? It's not to reject infinity, but to respect your own limits. To realize that boundaries aren't bad. They're essential. To choose a few rooms, and close the rest. To stop scrolling. To pause the stream. To say, this is enough. Not because the world ran out, but because you decided to. Infinity is beautiful. It's vast. It's mysterious. But your life needs structure. Your heart needs stillness. Your mind needs peace. And that peace doesn't come from having infinite options. It comes from making one meaningful choice and living fully within it. Paradox 30. Schrodinger's cat. When truth exists in two places at once. There's a box. Inside the box is a cat. You don't know if the cat is alive or dead, because also inside the box is a tiny radioactive atom. If the atom decays, it triggers a mechanism that breaks a vial of poison. If it doesn't decay, the cat lives. And until you open the box, you don't know. But here's the twist, the part that breaks your brain. Until you look, the cat is both alive and dead. At the same time. Not either. Both. This is Schrodinger's cat, a thought experiment that has haunted physicists, philosophers, and anyone who's ever asked, what is reality, before we observe it? It was proposed in 1935 by Austrian physicist Erwin Schrödinger, not to prove something, but to mock something. He wanted to expose the absurdity of how quantum mechanics describes the smallest particles in our universe. Because in quantum theory, a particle, an electron, a photon, can exist in multiple states at once. It's not here or there. It's here and there. It exists in a superposition, a cloud of possibilities, until someone observes it. And only then does it collapse into a single reality. Now replace the particle with a cat. A very unlucky cat. It becomes the perfect metaphor for what's so disturbing about quantum mechanics. That observation creates reality. That what's happening right now might not be anything until it's seen. And once it's seen, it becomes something. Not before. Not during. Only after. Let's pause for a moment. Because this isn't just about cats. Or atoms. Or science. This is about truth. About knowledge. About the terrifying idea that what we consider real might be more fragile than we think. Because if the universe only becomes definite when observed, then what is it the rest of the time? What is your life when no one is watching? The Schrodinger's cat paradox echoes through every corner of our experience. Think about uncertainty. You apply for a job. You send a text. You wait for results. And while you wait, you exist in two emotional states. Hope and fear. You imagine the best-case scenario and the worst. You live both futures. Replay both scripts. You feel alive and dead inside the box. And you don't know which version of you will emerge. Until the answer comes. It happens in relationships. You feel tension. But you haven't asked. You haven't looked. You haven't opened the box. So the love might still be there. Or it might be gone. You live in the paradox. Too scared to look. Too haunted to rest. Because once you ask, once you observe, you collapse the superposition. And the truth becomes irreversible. It appears in memory. You remember something one way. Someone else remembers it differently. Which version is true? Does it even matter? Or is memory itself a kind of quantum state? Shifting, blending, never fixed, until it's told? Until someone demands. What really happened? You open the box. And what comes out might not match what you believed. Even identity is touched by this paradox. Who are you when you're alone? Who are you when you're seen? Are you one self? Or many? Do you collapse into a role the moment you're observed? Do you perform the version of you that others expect? Or are you always a mix? A cloud of selves, waiting for the world to measure you? Schrodinger's cat is not a problem to solve. It's a mirror to stare into. It shows us that reality isn't always solid. That truth can wait in the shadows. And that sometimes, the only way to know something is to risk knowing it fully, to open the box, even if you don't like what's inside. And yet, there's power in that. Because uncertainty, while terrifying, is also full of potential. While the box is closed, the story is still being written. Possibility lives there. Hope lives there. Mystery lives there. The moment we open the box, we gain clarity, but we lose wonder. And sometimes, wonder is worth holding. So what should you do? Do you open the box? Or leave it closed? That depends. Are you ready for truth? Or do you need time with possibility? There is no right answer. Only a paradox. One that reminds us. We live between states. Between decisions. Between knowing and not knowing. And the art of life is knowing when to wait and when to look. Paradox 31. The Fermi Paradox. Where is everybody? On a clear night, you look up. You see stars. Thousands of them. Each one, a sun. Each sun, possibly with planets. And some of those planets, possibly with life. Now consider this. There are more stars in the universe than grains of sand on Earth. And yet, we've heard nothing. No signals. No messages. No visits. No undeniable proof of anyone or anything out there. This is the Fermi Paradox. A question so simple, it stops you cold. If the universe is so big, and life is so likely, where is everybody? Named after physicist Enrico Fermi, the paradox exposes a terrifying silence. Because logic suggests the cosmos should be teeming with civilizations, with explorers, with empires, with evidence. The math makes it seem inevitable. Even conservative estimates say there should be thousands, millions of advanced societies in our galaxy alone. But we hear nothing. We see nothing. We wait, and nothing comes. So the real question becomes, why? Why haven't we been contacted? Why haven't we detected a single unambiguous sign? Are we alone? Or is something preventing them? There are many possible answers. All of them unsettling. Maybe they're hiding, watching, waiting. Too advanced to be detected. Too evolved to care. We might be ants. And they're not interested in talking to ants. Or maybe they destroyed themselves. Maybe every intelligent species reaches a point of technological maturity and then collapses. War, environmental ruin, AI gone wrong, and the universe becomes a graveyard of civilizations that couldn't survive their own power. Or maybe we're early, one of the first to arrive, the first spark of intelligent life in a vast, ancient silence. A terrifying thought. That we are not only alone, but pioneers. That we are the voice the cosmos is waiting for. That the responsibility is ours. To make contact. To send the signal. To survive long enough to be found. But maybe we're not meant to. There are darker theories. What if there is something out there, and it's not friendly? What if civilizations that announce themselves are eliminated? Not by war, but by something bigger. More intelligent. More patient. A cosmic filter. A predator. A force that punishes curiosity. So the smart ones stay silent. Hide. Disappear. And maybe we've been broadcasting into the darkness. Like a flare in enemy territory. Inviting attention we don't want. And then there's the possibility that we're not listening properly. That the signals are there, but we don't recognize them. They may not use language, or radio, or time. Their entire reality might be built on different principles, different physics, different perception. Imagine trying to speak to a tree. Now imagine a being trying to speak to us. through a dimension we can't see. Maybe we've been surrounded all along, and we're just too blind to know. But the most haunting answer of all, maybe we are truly alone, not just in our galaxy, not just in our time, but in the entire universe. We're it. The only spark. The only voice. The only watchers of the stars. If that's true, then every scream, every song, every war, every poem, happens on a single rock, floating in an ocean of silence. And that makes Earth not just special, but sacred. The Fermi Paradox isn't just about aliens. It's about meaning, about the hunger to connect, about the fear that the universe may not answer back. We want to believe we're not alone, that someone else understands, that out there is a mirror. But maybe the silence is the mirror. It reflects not the absence of life, but the rarity of consciousness. It tells us, you are not small, you are precious, a spark, a miracle, a whisper in a vast cathedral, and no one else is singing. So what do we do with this silence? We can fear it, or we can fill it, with courage, with curiosity, with stories, with kindness. Because if we are the only ones here, then every act of compassion matters more. Every invention, every question, every discovery, they're not just for us. They're our signal, our message in a bottle, launched across eternity, saying simply, we were here, we saw beauty, we searched for others, and we chose to sing. Paradox 32, the unexpected hanging paradox when logic destroys itself. A prisoner stands before a judge. The sentence is clear. You will be hanged at noon, on one weekday next week. But the exact day will be a surprise. You will not know the day of the hanging until the executioner arrives at your cell. The prisoner returns to his cell, thinking, if the hanging is on Friday, then by Thursday night, he'll know it's the only day left. So, it can't be Friday, because that wouldn't be a surprise. So he crosses out Friday. Then he thinks, if it can't be Friday, then by Wednesday night, if he's still alive, he'll know it must be Thursday. And Thursday wouldn't be a surprise either. So he crosses out Thursday. Then Wednesday. Then Tuesday. Then Monday. He smiles. They can't hang me at all, he thinks. It's impossible. I've eliminated every option. But then, on Wednesday, at noon, the executioner walks in. And the prisoner is utterly shocked. Surprised. Because even though he had proven it couldn't happen, it did. This is the unexpected hanging paradox, a puzzle that twists logic into a knot. A self-defeating prophecy. A loop where knowledge collapses in on itself. Where trying to predict an event guarantees it won't surprise you. But if you rule it out completely, that's exactly what makes it surprising when it comes. It's a paradox of expectation versus reality. And it reveals something deeply unsettling. Sometimes, the more you try to outsmart the future, the more the future outsmarts you. At its core, the paradox is about certainty. Our obsession with knowing, predicting, controlling. We want to believe that everything has a logic, a cause, an explanation. But the unexpected hanging says, what if your logic turns against itself? What if knowing too much makes you blind? What if predicting something makes it impossible to experience? What if the need for certainty creates its own kind of ignorance? This paradox lives in our lives, quietly, constantly. You plan your week. Everything is organized, controlled, structured. And then something happens. A call, an accident, a miracle. It wasn't on the calendar. But it defines the week. It reshapes your life. It came from nowhere. But it mattered more than everything you planned. You didn't see it coming. That's the paradox. You prepared so well. That surprise became inevitable. It lives in anxiety. You worry about something. You try to predict every outcome, control every detail. But the more you try to prepare for the future, the more you feed your fear. Until the fear becomes the surprise. You expected everything. but forgot to expect the cost of expecting. Your mind became the executioner. It shows up in grief. You know it's coming. You try to prepare, to accept. But when the moment arrives, it still breaks you. Because no matter how much you anticipate loss, you're never really ready. And sometimes, the preparation only makes the pain sharper. You tried to steal the surprise from sorrow. But sorrow doesn't care. It finds you anyway. The unexpected hanging paradox also plays out in justice. Systems try to be fair, transparent, predictable. But when consequences must surprise to be effective, like punishments, deterrents, or inspections, the more we try to rationalize them, the less effective they become. It's a dilemma. If justice is truly fair, it must be expected. But if it's expected, it might be avoided. And so society dances between fairness and fear, transparency and unpredictability, trying to control behavior by threatening surprise. And in a strange way, it plays out in love. You fall for someone. But love, real love, the kind that moves through the bones, often comes not when you expect it, but when you've stopped looking. You try to predict who you'll love. When? Why? You date logically. You make lists. You compare options. And then, someone appears who defies the checklist, who wasn't part of the plan, who doesn't make sense, but makes you feel something real. Love, like the hanging, is unexpected, and all the logic in the world can't prepare your heart for it. So what does the paradox teach us? It teaches humility, that sometimes we don't outthink life. We experience it. That surprise is not the enemy, it's the teacher. That certainty is comforting, but often it's a trap. Because when you try to eliminate all uncertainty, you eliminate wonder. The unexpected hanging is a riddle, but it's also a reflection of how we try to live too tightly, too cautiously, too logically, and in doing so, we miss the beauty of surprise, the power of spontaneity, the growth that only comes when the expected falls apart. So don't fear the unknown. Don't rush to solve the riddle of your life too quickly. Let some mystery remain. Let some doors stay unopened. Let some days surprise you. Because the executioner may still come, but so might the miracle. Paradox 33, the barber paradox, when logic shaves itself into a corner. There's a small town. In this town, there's one barber. He follows a simple rule. I shave all those, and only those, who do not shave themselves. Straightforward, right? If you shave yourself, the barber leaves you alone. If you don't, he'll shave you. But now comes the question. Who shaves the barber? Think carefully. If the barber shaves himself, then by definition, he must not shave himself. Because he only shaves those who don't shave themselves. But if he doesn't shave himself, then according to the rule, he must shave himself. He can't do either. If he does, he doesn't. If he doesn't, he does. And just like that, logic eats itself. This is the barber paradox, a logical loop with no escape. A contradiction born from a rule that breaks itself. It was proposed by Bertrand Russell, one of the greatest logicians of the 20th century. And it wasn't just a riddle. It was a bomb. Because the barber paradox wasn't about shaving. It was about foundations. About how logic, if built carelessly, can create contradictions so powerful. They shake the very system they were meant to support. Russell's paradox revealed that some sets, some categories, are too self-referential to be allowed. They implode. But beyond the mathematics, there's something deeply human in this. Because the barber paradox isn't just about a man and a razor. It's about roles, expectations, contradictions we live with every day. Let's explore. Imagine a therapist. They're trained to help others, to listen, to heal. But who helps the therapist? If they treat themselves, do they lose objectivity? If they don't, who do they turn to? Or think of a leader. Everyone looks to them for guidance. They make the decisions. They carry the weight. But what happens when they need direction? Who leads the leader? If they step back, are they still leading? If they don't, do they burn out? It happens in families. A parent teaches strength, shows no weakness, is always the provider. But if they fall apart, who holds them? The paradox forms. They must be strong for others. But are others strong for them? If they rely on someone, are they failing their role? If they don't, are they denying their humanity? The barber paradox lives in identity. The helper who can't ask for help. The healer who can't show wounds. The thinker trapped in thoughts. Because sometimes, the role we adopt becomes the cage we build. We define ourselves by what we do for others, and then realize we've made no room for ourselves. And like the barber, we're stuck. It shows up in modern logic, too. Think about social media. We curate a version of ourselves. Polished, positive, put together. We help others with advice. We inspire with quotes. We guide with confidence. But who are we when the screen goes dark? Can the one who claims to uplift everyone else admit they feel lost? Or does that destroy the image? Can the influencer say, "I'm struggling"? Or does that break the rule of being the one who never needs shaving? Here's the truth. Sometimes the systems we create, whether logical or emotional, collapse under their own rules. Because they exclude the possibility of contradiction. But contradiction is real. It's human. It's unavoidable. You can be the helper, and need help. You can be the strong one, and feel weak. You can be the one who listens, and still want to be heard. The barber paradox teaches us that some questions don't have clean answers. That not all roles fit neatly. That not all logic is livable. And that sometimes, the most honest thing you can do is step outside the paradox. Change the rule. Redefine the game. Say, I am both. I am neither. I am more than this contradiction. So, who shaves the barber? Maybe, no one. Maybe the barber grows a beard. Maybe he rewrites the rule. Maybe he realizes he doesn't have to live inside a riddle. Because identity isn't about fitting perfectly into one box. It's about honoring all the parts of you, even the ones that conflict. The barber paradox isn't a flaw in the system. It's a message. That systems must serve the people, not trap them. And if your life starts to feel like a loop you can't escape, you don't need sharper logic. You need a better story. Paradox 34, the bootstrap paradox, when the origin disappears. You find an old book in your attic. It's filled with scientific knowledge, equations, inventions, breakthroughs that don't exist yet. You study it. You learn from it. You become famous for discovering these ideas. Decades later, before you die, you place the same book in your attic. The one you found years ago. Now ask yourself, where did the knowledge come from? You didn't write it. You found it. But the person who will find it is you. This is the bootstrap paradox, a time loop where an object, a piece of information, or even a person exists without a true origin. It creates itself. It is its own cause. A circle of existence with no beginning and no end. And that's the paradox. How can something exist if it was never created? This is more than science fiction. It's a question about causality, about time, about truth. Because we are taught everything has a source, a start, a point of origin. But the bootstrap paradox says, what if something just is? What if knowledge, or identity, or even existence itself, can loop back on itself endlessly? A snake eating its tail, a flame lighting itself, a mind birthing its own memory. The term bootstrap comes from the phrase, pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps. An impossibility. You can't lift yourself off the ground by tugging at your own shoes. But in time travel stories, that's exactly what happens. A person gives themselves the idea. That leads them to become the person who gave themselves the idea. A time traveler gives Beethoven his own sheet music. A future engineer receives a design for a machine she'll one day invent. But no one ever invented it. It was passed from future to past, and back again. a perfect circle, and a perfect mystery. But this paradox doesn't just live in sci-fi. It lives in our culture. Think of a myth, a story told generation after generation. We don't know who told it first. We just know it shaped our beliefs. Or think of a language. New words are added every year. But some phrases, some idioms, have no known origin. They just exist. Passed on, repeated, taught. But who was the first? Sometimes, we can't trace the line. We only know the loop. It appears in inspiration. You read a book. It changes you. You write your own. Someone else reads it. They are changed. You cite the great minds that came before you. They were shaped by those before them. And on it goes. But where was the seed? Where did the spark begin? Was there a first idea? Or was all knowledge just passed down in an infinite cycle? A thought with no origin. A truth with no inventor. It happens in belief. You inherit a worldview. Not because you examined it, but because someone else gave it to you. Parents, teachers, books. You carry it, live it, pass it on. And maybe one day, you change it. But even then, are you the author? Or are you just the next node in a chain of unseen causes? Are you writing your story? Or remembering one that's always been there? The bootstrap paradox challenges the very core of identity. If your ideas were shaped by others, who were shaped by others, then what part of you is truly original? What part of you was born entirely from within? Are you a product? A reflection? A loop? Or something more? Something that transcends origin? So what do we do with this paradox? We accept it not as a glitch, but as a lens. A way to understand that some things don't need beginnings to be meaningful. That mystery does not reduce value. That influence and inspiration don't follow straight lines. They spiral. They echo. And we are echoes, too. Of the people who came before. Of the voices we've heard. Of the moments that shaped us even if we can't trace them. The bootstrap paradox reminds us. Creation doesn't always need a cause. Some things exist because they must. Because they resonate. Because they return. And that's not failure. That's beauty. Because if something has no beginning, maybe it also has no end. Maybe your story, your art, your words, your impact will ripple forward and someday return to you. Familiar, transformed, untraceable, but yours, all the same. Paradox 35, the sword and shield paradox. When absolute strength collides with itself. An ancient merchant arrives in a bustling marketplace. He sets down two items. A shield so strong, he claims, that no weapon can pierce it. And a sword so sharp, he says, that it can cut through anything. A curious crowd gathers. One man raises his hand and asks, "What happens if your sword strikes your shield?" The merchant goes silent. And in that silence, the paradox is born. This is the sword and shield paradox, also known as the Chinese paradox of irresistible force and immovable object. It presents a contradiction that seems simple, but echoes through philosophy, physics, and the human psyche. What happens when an unstoppable force meets an unbreakable object? Can both exist? Or must one yield? At first, it's amusing, a riddle, a brain teaser. But then it starts to feel familiar. Because the sword and shield paradox isn't just about weapons. It's about conflict, duality, contradiction that lives within all of us. It's the moment two absolute truths crash into each other, and neither is willing to move. And that collision, that's where transformation begins. Think of two beliefs. I must always be strong. I deserve to rest. You hold both. You value both. But one day, you're exhausted. And suddenly, strength demands rest. Now they conflict. The sword meets the shield. And you're stuck in paralysis. Torn between pushing through and letting go. This is the internal war we rarely name, but often live. Or consider this. Forgive others. Protect yourself from harm. What happens when forgiving puts you back in harm's way? What happens when protecting yourself means carrying resentment? The sword of compassion strikes the shield of boundaries. And your heart is caught in between. The paradox appears in relationships. Two people, both strong, both right, both unwilling to back down. One brings truth, the other brings pain. Neither bends. Words become weapons, silence becomes armor, and love becomes a battlefield. Not because one is cruel, but because both are absolutely sure. And when two certainties collide, connection collapses. It echoes in politics, in culture wars, in religion. Freedom of speech meets protection from harm. Tradition meets progress. Security meets privacy. Each side has merit. Each claim is valid. But together, they clash. And when neither yields, society polarizes. Not from weakness, but from too much righteousness. Everyone becomes the sword, or the shield, and no one listens. It shows up in physics, too. In the laws of the universe. Can an object be truly immovable? Can a force be truly unstoppable? If yes, then logic breaks. Because you can't have both. The existence of one invalidates the other. And this forces a new insight. Absolutes may be impossible. Not just practically, but conceptually. Maybe the universe doesn't allow for perfection. Maybe it breaks things before they break everything else. And yet, the paradox lives inside us. In every person who refuses to feel pain. In every person who demands control over chaos. In every perfectionist who fears failure, but craves freedom. The sword, ambition. The shield, fear. You want to move, but you don't want to be moved. You want change, but only if you're in control. And so, nothing happens. You stand still. But inside, you shatter. So what's the answer? It's not to choose the sword or the shield. It's to recognize that absolutes destroy balance. That the strongest people are the ones who know when to soften. That the sharpest minds are the ones that can yield. True strength is flexible. True courage bends before it breaks. It's the sword that knows when not to cut. The shield that knows when to lower. It's wisdom, in motion. Because in real life, the question is not, which is stronger? It's, can we hold both? Can we stand for truth, without cutting others down? Can we protect our hearts, without closing them completely? Can we be powerful and tender? Can we speak and listen? Can we live in the tension, without needing a winner? The sword and shield paradox reminds us. The greatest harm comes not from contradiction, but from refusing to acknowledge it. And the greatest peace, it comes when we learn that every sword must be sheathed, and every shield eventually lowered. Not to surrender, but to connect, to grow, to finally stop fighting battles that were never meant to be won. Paradox 36, the Pinocchio paradox. When telling the truth becomes a lie. Picture this. Pinocchio, the wooden boy whose nose grows when he lies, looks you in the eye and says, "My nose will grow now." And suddenly, the universe pauses. Because if he's telling the truth, his nose should grow. But if it does grow, that means he was telling the truth. And his nose only grows when he's lying. So it shouldn't grow. But if it doesn't grow, then he must have been lying. Which means, it should grow. You're stuck. His nose grows if and only if it doesn't grow. A paradox. A loop. A riddle trapped in a child's voice. This is the Pinocchio paradox, a deceptively simple question that breaks logic into splinters. It sounds like a fairy tale. It is. But the implications are deeply real. Because the Pinocchio paradox asks, what happens when truth and falsehood collapse into each other? When you say something that can't be true and can't be false. At the same time, it challenges the basic laws of language, of logic, of meaning. And suddenly, a puppet's innocent sentence becomes a philosophical time bomb. This is a close cousin of the liar paradox. where someone says, "This sentence is false. If it's true, then it must be false. If it's false, then it must be true." The Pinocchio version adds stakes and a face. It adds a body that reacts, a nose that grows. It makes the paradox real by forcing us to imagine what happens next. And that next reveals something strange. Sometimes, the system we use to understand truth becomes impossible when it tries to reflect on itself. But this isn't just about logic puzzles. This paradox plays out in real life, all the time. Think of a person who says, "I'm not trustworthy." If they're telling the truth, then they must be trustworthy, right? But if they're trustworthy, then they're lying. Now what? You question everything they say. Every word becomes a mirror that reflects back on itself. And you're caught, not by deception, but by indecidability. Or someone says, "I always lie." If that's true, then it must be a lie, which means it's not true, but then it is. And so on. We spin in circles, not because we're confused, but because the sentence is unresolvable. It breaks the code. This paradox lives in trust. You ask someone, "Are you being honest with me?" They say yes. But what if your very need to ask already means you don't believe them? What if trust requires not needing proof? What if the moment you need certainty, you lose the very thing you're trying to confirm? Like Pinocchio's nose. It only shows itself when you're already too late. It shows up in politics. A leader claims, "You can't believe anything the media says." But they say it on the media. So if you believe them, you're disbelieving the very system that gave them a voice. But if you disbelieve them, are you believing the media again? Which version is true? You're stuck between two opposing claims, each undermining the other. And truth becomes a weapon, not a compass. It happens in identity, too. You say, "I'm a fraud." But only someone who cares about being genuine would say that. Which makes you not a fraud. But if you believe that, are you lying to yourself? It's imposter syndrome in paradox form, where honesty about your doubt becomes the very proof you're wrong to doubt. And still, you don't feel certain, because the loop is emotional, not logical. So what does the Pinocchio paradox teach us? It shows us that language is powerful, but not perfect. That truth is not just about words, but intent. And that sometimes, our own self-awareness becomes a trap. You try to name the truth, but the act of naming it changes it. Just like observing a particle changes its behavior. Defining truth too strictly can make it unravel. So how do we escape? We stop trying to pin down every truth. Like a butterfly on a board. We stop demanding that every sentence be neatly categorized as true or false. And instead, we allow space for uncertainty, for context, for paradox. We recognize that some things are emotionally true, even if they can't be logically proven. That some confessions are honest, even if they loop back on themselves. That some questions are not meant to be answered. They're meant to be held. The Pinocchio paradox reminds us that truth is more than a switch. It's a spectrum, a story, a dance. And sometimes, the most honest thing you can say is, "I don't know." Because certainty is seductive, but humility is wiser. And in a world where noses don't grow, when we lie, maybe our best guide is not logic, but conscience. Paradox 37, Simpson's paradox, when the truth changes just by looking at it differently. Imagine you're comparing two hospitals. In Hospital A, 90% of patients survive surgery. In Hospital B, only 80% survive. Clearly, Hospital A is better, right? But then you look deeper. Hospital A mostly handles simple cases. Hospital B takes the most critical, high-risk patients. And when you break it down by complexity, you find that in every category, Hospital B actually has better survival rates. So how can B be better in every group, but worse overall? This is Simpson's paradox, when trends that appear in different groups of data reverse when those groups are combined. It's a paradox of aggregation. A statistical illusion that shows how numbers can lie. Not because they're wrong, but because they're incomplete. Simpson's paradox says, truth depends on how you slice the story. The way you group information can flip the conclusion entirely. And in a world ruled by numbers, that should terrify us. Because it means facts are not always final. They're shaped by context, by framing, by perspective. And what looks like truth might just be a trick of the lens. Let's see it in another way. Imagine a college with two departments, engineering and literature. Last year, the acceptance rate for women was lower than for men. Sexism? Maybe. But dig deeper. In engineering, more women applied and it's the hardest department to get into. In literature, more men applied and it's easier to get in. When you look within each department, women were accepted at equal or higher rates than men. But combined, the overall numbers say women were discriminated against. Same data, opposite conclusions. That's Simpson's paradox. And it doesn't just live in spreadsheets. It lives in our lives. You say, this choice is better for me overall. But when you look closer, each part of it might be worse. You chose a job with higher pay, but every day feels more draining. You entered a relationship that looks perfect on paper, but moment by moment, you're lonelier than ever. The summary says success. The details whisper regret. Or the opposite. You think your life is falling apart. But look closer. In every part, your relationships, your health, your peace, you're actually improving. But the big picture hasn't caught up yet. Simpson's paradox lives in that gap. Between parts and whole. Between now and later. Between data and meaning. It happens in justice. Crime statistics may show one group being arrested more often. Prejudice? Possibly. But when you dig down, you find that enforcement, location, reporting, and socioeconomic status all play roles in shaping the numbers. So who's right? The answer depends on which data you choose, what lens you apply, what frame you honor. And often, both sides are holding the truth, and both sides are missing it. It happens in communication. Two people argue. Each makes a valid point from their angle, but their frameworks are different. They're comparing apples to oranges, different timelines, different metrics. And so, even though they're using facts, they talk past each other. Each clings to their truth, but together, their truths create a paradox. So what do we do with this? We learn to ask better questions, to slow down when we're shown a statistic, to ask, what's behind the number? What's being grouped together that shouldn't be? What's being ignored? And even more deeply, what assumptions am I bringing that make this number feel true? Because numbers don't lie, but they can mislead, especially when we believe them too quickly. Simpson's paradox reminds us that truth is layered, that data is not destiny, that a conclusion is only as strong as the lens you use to get there. It humbles us, because even the smartest among us can be fooled by our own summaries. So next time you hear, the data speaks for itself, pause. Because data doesn't speak. People do. And every sentence we say carries a lens, a frame, a bias. Simpson's paradox teaches us to zoom in, to zoom out, to hold both the forest and the trees at the same time, because only then does the real picture emerge. Paradox 38, the dichotomy paradox, why you can never arrive. You stand at the edge of a path. Your goal is just ahead, 10 steps away. You take your first step. You cover half the distance. Now you're 5 steps away. You step again. You halve the distance. Now you're 2.5 steps away. You go again. And again. Each time, cutting the distance in half. But no matter how many steps you take, you never quite reach the goal. Because there's always another half left. Always another sliver of space. Another fraction. Another piece. This is the dichotomy paradox, first proposed by Zeno of Elea over 2,000 years ago. It's simple and unsettling, because it says, before you can get somewhere, you must get halfway there. And before that, halfway to halfway. And so on, forever. And if you must complete an infinite number of steps just to arrive, how do you ever move at all? Zeno used this paradox to argue that motion itself is an illusion. That what we see as movement is actually a trick of perception. That no matter how close we think we are to something, we are always still approaching. Never quite there. Never finished. And if that sounds abstract, wait until you realize you're living it. Because the dichotomy paradox isn't just about walking down a road. It's about progress, ambition, healing, perfection. Think about your goals. You set a target. You take steps. But once you get closer, you move the finish line. You start a business. Now you want growth. You find love. Now you want certainty. You improve your health. Now you want to look better. Every time you get closer, the goal divides itself again, and again, and again. You think you're 10 steps away from happiness, but every step halves the distance. And still, happiness remains just ahead. That's the paradox. You are always almost there, and never quite arrived. It shows up in self-worth. You tell yourself, once I achieve this, then I'll feel enough. But you get there, and somehow, you don't feel complete. So you chase the next thing, and the next. Each time, closer. Each time, not quite. You are always becoming, never being. It plays out in relationships. You want connection. You reach out. You build trust. But just when you feel close, you second guess. You think, do they really know me? What if this isn't it yet? You crave more depth, more reassurance. But the closer you get to feeling secure, the more you notice the tiny gaps, the half steps you haven't taken. And suddenly, you feel distant again. It happens in healing. You work through pain. You grow. You forgive. But healing isn't binary. It's not done or not done. It's 1,000 tiny halving steps. Each one brings you closer. Each one reveals more to work on. You're better, but not whole. Stronger, but still scarred. You are healing. Forever. And that's not failure. That's the paradox. So what does the dichotomy paradox teach us? Not that we're broken. Not that we'll never arrive. But that arrival is a myth. There is no final step. No perfect finish line. And that's okay. Because maybe the point is not to arrive, but to become. To keep stepping. Keep growing. Keep halving the distance. And learning to love the space that remains. In mathematics, this paradox is resolved. We know that infinite steps can still add up to a finite distance. That a limit exists. That motion is real. But in life, we often forget that. We believe we're stuck because we haven't arrived. But maybe progress isn't measured by how close you are to the end, but by the courage to take the next half step, and then the next, and then the next. So if you feel far from your goal, your dream, your peace, remember, you're not failing. You're just in the paradox. And every small step, even if it feels like nothing, is movement. And eventually, you're standing where you once longed to be, not because you leapt, but because you never stopped walking. Paradox 39, the grandfather paradox, when time travel breaks reality. You step into a time machine. You go back, decades. Back to when your grandfather was a young man, before he met your grandmother, before your parent was ever born. And you make a decision. You prevent him from ever meeting her. Maybe by accident. Maybe on purpose. Either way, your parent is never born. Which means you are never born. But wait. If you were never born, then you couldn't have traveled back in time in the first place. So your grandfather would have met your grandmother, which means you would have been born, which means you could go back in time and stop them from meeting. And round it goes. This is the grandfather paradox, a logical and emotional time loop where changing the past erases your ability to change it. It's one of the most famous paradoxes in time travel. Not because it's confusing, but because it makes too much sense. It follows logic all the way to collapse. It confronts us with an idea both fascinating and terrifying. That time is not just a river we float in, but a thread we could twist, tie, or sever. And in doing so, we could destroy the very conditions that made our choices possible. The paradox strikes at the heart of cause and effect. Of what comes first. If a cause is B, but B goes back and prevents A, then what caused anything? We're used to time as a one-way street. We move forward. We age. We remember the past. We imagine the future. But the grandfather paradox turns the road into a circle. And in that circle, logic begins to tear. But this paradox isn't just about time travel. It's about regret, control, the longing to rewrite the past. Think of a moment in your life you wish you could change. A mistake, a goodbye, a word not said, a decision that haunts you. You imagine going back, fixing it, stopping it. But here's the question. If you erase that moment, do you erase the version of you that learned from it? Would you be the same person? Or would changing your past undo the very self that wants to change it? This paradox shows up in healing. You want to undo the pain, but the pain shaped your compassion, your wisdom, your strength. Without it, who are you? You want to go back. But deep down, you know, if I erase that, I might erase me. It shows up in parenting. You protect your child from every mistake. But then they don't grow. They don't fail. They don't learn. And in trying to create a better future for them, you accidentally create a weaker present. The paradox unfolds. You try to remove the struggle that makes the strength, and then wonder why they feel unprepared. It even appears in leadership. A company tries to prevent failure by avoiding risk. But in avoiding risk, they also avoid innovation. They become stagnant, safe, but stuck. The very act of protecting the future prevents the future from happening. And the paradox is complete. But perhaps the most powerful way this paradox appears is in the story we tell ourselves. You say, if I had started earlier, if I hadn't messed up, if I had made a different choice. But those thoughts assume something impossible. That you could remove the past without removing what the past taught you. That you could undo your origin and still be here wiser, stronger, kinder. But maybe the version of you that could change the past only exists because you didn't. So what's the lesson? It's not that the past was perfect, or that pain is always necessary, but that your story matters. And it matters because of the contradictions, the detours, the moments you wish you could unwrite. The grandfather paradox reminds us, time is fragile, identity is layered, and trying to undo the past might unravel everything you've become. So maybe the goal isn't to go back. It's to go forward. With more understanding, more intention, more grace. Not to erase who we were, but to honor who we've become. Not to change the past, but to change our relationship with it. Because the true power of time is not in bending it, but in learning from it. Paradox 40. The grain of millet paradox, when silence speaks louder than sound. A philosopher holds a grain of millet between his fingers. Light as dust. Smaller than a whisper. He turns to his student and asks, if I drop this single grain, will it make a sound? The student shakes his head. No. It's too light. Then the philosopher asks, what if I drop 1,000 grains at once? The student nods. Yes. That would make a sound. The philosopher smiles. But if 1,000 grains make a sound, and each grain makes no sound, where does the sound come from? The room falls silent. Because something doesn't add up. This is the grain of millet paradox, a riddle from ancient Greece that hides in plain sight. It asks, when does nothing become something? When does quiet turn into noise? When does small become significant? At first glance, it's a word game, a trick of logic. But if you look deeper, it's a mirror for life, for change, for the invisible moments that make us who we are. Because this paradox is about thresholds, how we ignore what's too small to notice, until it gathers, until it grows, until it tips into something we can no longer deny. And then, we act like it came from nowhere. You see this in conflict. One sharp comment. You let it go. It's just a grain. Another. You shrug. Over time, it builds. And one day, boom. An explosion. An argument. A rupture. And people ask, where did this come from? But the answer was always there. Grain, by grain, by grain. Silence that became sound. Pain that became impossible to ignore. It happens in change. You read one page. You meditate for a minute. You skip one dessert. You take a short walk. Each one feels meaningless. Too small to matter. But keep going. And you wake up weeks later, realizing your body feels lighter. Your mind feels calmer. Your momentum has shifted. And you wonder, when did this begin? It began when the first grain dropped. You just didn't hear it at the time. It shows up in burnout. You stay a little late at work. You skip a meal. You cancel a plan. You push through a headache. No big deal. But then, you're tired all the time. Numb. Resentful. Disconnected. And you say, I don't know how I got here. But you do. You got here. One grain at a time. It lives in healing, too. You think you're not making progress. You're still anxious. Still grieving. Still uncertain. But what you don't see are the grains falling. The small conversations. The breath you caught. The hour you slept. The boundary you kept. You don't hear the sound yet. But it's there. You are healing. Quietly. The grain of millet paradox teaches us. Impact isn't always loud. Change isn't always visible. We live in a world that celebrates big moments. Loud wins. Clear transformations. But the truth, everything begins in silence. And what feels insignificant today may be the start of something massive. This paradox is also a warning. Because just as grains can heal you, they can also hurt you. A single lie, a moment of avoidance, a compromise against your values. Tiny, forgettable, until they're not. Until you look up and no longer recognize yourself. So what do we do with this? We start listening to the small things. We stop waiting for fireworks and learn to honor the flicker. We stop asking, is this big enough to matter? And start asking, what direction is this moving me? Because motion, not magnitude, determines momentum. The grain of millet paradox reminds us that silence is not absence. That little things are never just little. That progress is often inaudible until it becomes undeniable. You are building something. Right now. Right here. Even if you can't hear it yet. So keep going. Keep choosing. Keep dropping the grains. One day, the world will hear. Paradox 41. Olbers Paradox, why the night sky isn't bright. Step outside on a clear night. Look up. You see stars scattered across the sky. Bright, shimmering, ancient. But between them, darkness. Endless, silent darkness. Now ask yourself, if the universe is infinite and filled with stars in every direction, why is the night sky dark? This is Olbers Paradox, named after the 19th century German astronomer Heinrich Wilhelm Olbers. He didn't discover the darkness. We all live under it. But he asked the question no one thought to ask. Why isn't the sky as bright as the surface of the sun? If every line of sight should eventually hit a star, shouldn't the night sky be flooded with light? And yet, it isn't. Why? This paradox cuts deep, not just into astronomy, but into what we assume about infinity, space, and time. It assumes three things. The universe is infinite. The universe is filled with stars. The universe is static and eternal. If those were true, the sky should be ablaze. Every point should glow. Every inch of blackness should be filled. But it isn't. So, something's wrong. And that's where the story begins. Science eventually resolved the paradox with a beautiful truth. The universe is not eternal. It had a beginning. A moment, the Big Bang. 13.8 billion years ago. And because light travels at a finite speed, we can only see as far as light has had time to reach us. Beyond that, darkness. Not because stars aren't there, but because their light hasn't arrived yet. The darkness of the night sky isn't emptiness. It's history catching up. Olbers' paradox is no longer a mystery of science. But it remains a metaphor for something far more profound. Why, in a world so full of people, do we sometimes feel so alone? Why, with so many sources of light, do our nights feel so dark? Why, when we know joy exists, can it feel so far away? Because sometimes, it hasn't reached us yet. Not because we're broken, not because we're cursed, but because light takes time. Think about grief. You know the pain will ease. You've heard it does. You believe in healing, but still, you sit in the dark. And you ask, where is the light? But maybe, it's still traveling. Coming from somewhere you can't yet see. Approaching in silence. Softly. Slowly. But surely. It happens in dreams. You work. You hope. You plant seeds. But days go by. Months. Years. No fruit. No light. And you think, maybe the stars were never real. But stars are real. They're just far. And some dreams, like starlight, take time to reach you. It shows up in love. You open your heart. You give. You wait. But no warmth returns. And you wonder, am I unlovable? No. You're just looking into a sky where the light hasn't arrived yet. Maybe it's still on its way. Or maybe you're pointed in the wrong direction. But darkness doesn't mean you're alone. It means you're still waiting for the light. Olbers' paradox teaches us that absence isn't always emptiness. That silence isn't always void. That sometimes, truth is just delayed. And that's okay. Because when it finally arrives, when it finally touches your life, it will have traveled across the universe to find you. And it will be worth the wait. So the next time your world feels dim, remember, the light may already be on its way. Invisible, but real. Faint, but unwavering. And just because you can't see it now, doesn't mean it's not coming. Paradox 42, the paradox of the raven when seeing the truth makes it less certain. A philosopher points to a black raven flying through the sky. He says, all ravens are black. So, every time you see a black raven, that statement seems more true. But now imagine this. You walk into a room and see a green apple. The philosopher smiles and says, that also supports the claim that all ravens are black. You blink. Confused. How does a green apple prove anything about ravens? And yet, logically, it does. Because the statement all ravens are black is logically equivalent to saying, if something is not black, then it is not a raven. A green apple is not black. And it's not a raven. Therefore, it fits. It supports the rule. This is the paradox of the raven, also known as the paradox of confirmation. It reveals a strange, unsettling truth about logic. Not everything that supports a claim feels like evidence. And sometimes, what looks like truth might just be a mirror of our expectations. This paradox was proposed by philosopher Carl Hempel in the 1940s. It asks a question that haunts both science and psychology. How do we know when something is true? We look for confirmation. We collect examples. We observe patterns. But this paradox says, not all confirmations are equal. Some feel powerful. Others feel irrelevant. even if they're logically identical. It reveals the fragile line between truth and belief, between what we can prove and what we accept as proof. Think about it. You say, successful people wake up early, and you point to someone who does and thrives. Confirmation. But what about the night owls who succeed? Or the early risers who don't? You ignore them, because they don't fit the story you want. Just like the green apple. You saw the raven and believed. You saw the apple and shrugged. Even though, in logic, both counted. This paradox shows up in bias. You believe a stereotype. You meet one person who fits it. And your belief grows stronger. But you ignore the dozens who don't. They're the apples. They contradict nothing. But you forget them. You only remember what supports you. You only hear the ravens. And so, your beliefs tighten. Not from truth, but from selective seeing. It happens in relationships. You think your partner is distant. They forget a text and that confirms it. But when they surprise you with kindness, you call it an exception. You want to believe you're right, even if it hurts. Because certainty feels safer than contradiction. You're counting ravens, ignoring apples, and calling it proof. It happens in science. A researcher runs an experiment, finds the expected result, publishes. But the failed trials, the messy outcomes, those are left out. Because they don't confirm, even though they matter. Because truth is not built only from confirmation. It's built from contradiction, too. From green apples. From the data that doesn't fit. From the evidence that says, maybe the rule isn't complete. So what's the lesson? It's not that confirmation is bad. It's that confirmation can be deceptive. It's not that ravens lie. It's that we forget the apples. That we're drawn to what agrees with us. And blind to what challenges us. But growth lives in challenge. In complexity. In contradiction. In the moments when the evidence makes us pause, instead of applaud. The paradox of the raven reminds us that truth is not always found where we expect it. That logic and intuition don't always hold hands. And that wisdom means looking at what you'd rather not see. So next time you seek certainty, ask yourself, am I counting all the evidence? Or just the parts that make me feel right? Because the green apple may not be exciting, but it's still part of the story. And ignoring it means missing the whole. Paradox 43, the Stockdale Paradox, hope without illusion, realism without despair. The year is 1965. Admiral James Stockdale's fighter jet is shot down over North Vietnam. He's captured, tortured, and thrown into a prisoner of war camp. For the next 7 years, he endures brutality, isolation, and the constant threat of death. But he survives. And not just physically. He emerges with his mind and soul intact. Years later, when asked how he made it through, he says, "I never lost faith that I would prevail in the end. But I also confronted the most brutal facts of my current reality." This is the Stockdale Paradox. The tension between unwavering hope and unflinching realism. It sounds impossible. How do you believe things will work out, while admitting that, right now, they're falling apart? How do you hold on to hope without lying to yourself? How do you stay grounded in truth without giving in to despair? This paradox doesn't offer comfort. It offers something harder and more powerful. Clarity. The name comes from Jim Collins's book Good to Great, where he describes how companies and people survive the impossible. He found that those who only held on to hope often broke first. They said, "We'll be out by Christmas." But Christmas came and went. Then Easter. Then summer. And with each broken deadline, their spirits crumbled. But those who survived, they refused to lie to themselves. They said, "This is hard. It might get worse. But I will endure." They didn't pretend things were better than they were. But they also never let go of the belief that they would make it through. That's the paradox. It lives in everyday life. You face hardship, a diagnosis, a layoff, a breakup. You want to believe it'll be over soon, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes the pain stretches on. The answer doesn't come. The healing takes years. If you only cling to optimism, you risk collapse. But if you let go of hope entirely, you risk becoming hollow. The Stockdale Paradox offers the middle way. Hope without delusion. Courage without denial. It shows up in addiction recovery. People say, "I'll be fixed in a month. I'll never relapse. I've got this." But then they fall and feel ashamed, weak, hopeless, because they thought success meant no setbacks. But real recovery, it's brutal, it's messy, and it requires both believing in yourself and acknowledging the fight won't end tomorrow. It appears in activism. You fight for change, for justice, for a better world. But it's slow, frustrating. Sometimes, it feels like nothing's changing. If you believe it will all shift overnight, you'll burn out. But if you believe nothing matters, you'll stop fighting. The Stockdale Paradox says, yes, the road is long. Yes, the system is broken. But we endure. We fight. Because we believe the future is worth it. It lives in grief. You lose someone. And people say, time heals all wounds. But that's not always true. Time doesn't heal. You do. Through effort. Through presence. Through pain. If you wait for time to erase the ache, you might wait forever. But if you confront the ache, and still believe joy is possible, you heal. Not because it stops hurting, but because you learn to carry it. So how do you live the Stockdale Paradox? You start by telling yourself the truth. This is hard. I am scared. I don't know how this ends. And then you add, but I believe I will get through it. Not because you're certain. Not because there's proof. But because you've decided to keep going. That decision, that stubborn, quiet, unshakable belief, is your power. The Stockdale Paradox teaches us that optimism alone can be dangerous. That realism alone can be soul-crushing. But together, they form something stronger. Resilience. Not flashy, not pretty, but enduring. And in a world full of chaos, that might be the most radical thing you can choose. Paradox 44, the card paradox, when logic folds in on itself. You pick up a card. On one side, it says, the statement on the other side of this card is true. You turn it over. On the other side, it says, the statement on the other side of this card is false. And suddenly, your brain stalls. You try to follow the loop. But wherever you start, you end up chasing your tail. Because if the first side is true, then the second side must be true. But the second side says the first side is false. Which means, it isn't true. But if the first side is false, then the second side, which claims the first side is false, must be true. But then, the first side is true again. You're trapped. Truth implies falsehood. Falsehood implies truth. This is the card paradox, a variation of the classic liar paradox, cleverly twisted into physical form. It's a riddle, a mirror, a trap. And once you fall in, you realize some statements cannot be consistently assigned truth or falsehood, because they reference each other. And in doing so, they tear logic apart. But why does this matter? It's just a card. A trick. Right. Not quite. Because the card paradox exposes something terrifying and beautiful about the nature of truth. That truth can fold in on itself. That not every system can describe itself without breaking. That certainty has limits. And that those limits aren't just theoretical. They show up everywhere. Think of self-identity. You say, I'm a person who always tells the truth. But what if you're wrong? What if you lied once and don't remember? Then the identity collapses. You say, I know myself. But what if that knowledge is part of the self you're trying to know? What if you are the card, trying to describe both sides at once, and unraveling in the process? It happens in belief. You believe in honesty, in love, in goodness. But what if your belief becomes so rigid that it blinds you? What if defending your truth leads you to act without compassion? Now your truth contradicts your values. You become both sides of the card. You say, I'm doing this because it's right. But something inside whispers, then why does it feel so wrong? Truth becomes entangled in itself. It happens in mental health. You say, I shouldn't feel anxious. There's no reason. But now you're anxious about being anxious. Or, I shouldn't feel sad. I have a good life. And now you feel guilt for feeling sad. It loops. The more you try to fix it, the more twisted it becomes. You are both the statement and the contradiction. Trying to solve yourself, with yourself. Like trying to lift a chair while sitting in it. It even happens in leadership. You lead by example. You preach humility. But the more you talk about your humility, the less humble you appear. You say, I'm not here for power. But every word you say grants you more of it. You're the card again. One side claiming sincerity, the other creating doubt. And people begin to question, can this truth be trusted if it comes from someone claiming to be truth itself? So what do we do? How do we live in a world where truth can contradict itself? We start by realizing, not all questions have clean answers. Not all statements are solvable. And that's okay. Because life isn't a logic puzzle. It's a paradox. A messy, beautiful paradox of feelings, contradictions, and shifting truths. The card paradox reminds us that certainty is fragile, that language can mislead, that some things cannot be said without breaking themselves. And in that realization, there's freedom. Because once you stop trying to fit every truth into a perfect box, you can begin to live with ambiguity, to trust your instincts, even when your logic loops, to say, I may not know for sure, but I'm showing up anyway. That's not weak. That's courage. So next time you find yourself in a loop, trying to explain yourself, justify yourself, solve yourself, pause, flip the card, then flip it again, and smile. Because now you know, not every answer lives on the surface. Some truths can only be held, not solved. Paradox 45, the paradox of enrichment when giving too much, destroys everything. Imagine a quiet lake. In it lives a small population of fish. They feed on algae. They grow slowly. They reproduce modestly. But over time, the ecosystem reaches a balance. Predators and prey, growth and decay. Then one day, humans arrive. They want more fish. So they dump fertilizer into the water, rich nutrients to help algae grow faster. And it works. The algae blooms. The fish feast. Their population explodes. For a moment, it seems like paradise. But then, the algae consumes all the oxygen. The water turns toxic. The fish suffocate. The system collapses. Not because of scarcity, but because of abundance. This is the paradox of enrichment. It says, too much of a good thing can destroy the thing itself. It sounds like a warning from ecology, and it is. But it also speaks to something much deeper. Because this paradox shows up everywhere. In nature, in economics, in parenting, in life. It asks a haunting question. What happens when help becomes harm? In the 1970s, ecologist Michael Rosenzweig formalized the paradox with predator-prey models. He found that when prey had too much food, their population would surge, which gave predators more to eat, which made predators reproduce faster, which led to overpredation, and then collapse. The system didn't fail from lack. It failed from excess, from imbalance, from unintended consequences of well-meaning actions. Now zoom out, and you'll see it everywhere. In parenting, you want your child to succeed, to be happy, to never suffer. So you give them everything: support, comfort, protection. But over time, they struggle to handle discomfort. They lack resilience. They don't know how to fall, because they were never allowed to. And now, they break under pressure, because the world doesn't care how enriched they were. It happens in education. A school wants students to perform better, so they remove failure. They inflate grades. They eliminate consequences. And for a while, it feels good. But when those students enter the real world, where feedback is sharp and stakes are real, they crumble. Because their enrichment robbed them of grit. It happens in relationships. You love someone. You want to support them. So you give. And give. And give. But slowly, without realizing it, you disempower them. They stop making decisions. They stop growing. They depend on you so much that they lose themselves. And then, resentment blooms. Not because love was lacking, but because it overran the soil. What was meant to nurture choked everything out. It happens in wealth. You work hard. You earn more. You upgrade your life. But then the more you have, the more you want. Abundance becomes the default. Luxury becomes expectation. And suddenly, you need more just to feel normal. Gratitude fades. Satisfaction disappears. And joy, once sparked by small things, now requires bigger, louder, flashier experiences. You're rich, but you feel hollow. This paradox warns us that growth without balance becomes collapse. That giving without boundaries becomes dependence. That freedom without friction becomes chaos. And love without limits becomes control. But there's another layer. The paradox of enrichment also whispers, you don't need more, you need enough. That contentment isn't about maximum gain, but measured generosity. That systems thrive, not when flooded, but when nurtured in rhythm. Ebb and flow, give and pause, effort and rest. That's the dance that sustains. So what's the lesson? It's not to withhold love, or stunt growth, or fear abundance. It's to respect the system, to understand that even good things have breaking points, that every ecosystem, whether in nature or in your heart, needs space to breathe, to adapt, to learn. The paradox of enrichment reminds us, more is not always better, help is not always helpful, and sometimes, the best way to give is to stop giving for a moment, to let people fall, to let yourself fail, to allow discomfort, so that strength can rise. Because growth born from struggle is more durable than comfort born from excess. Paradox 46, the service recovery paradox, when failing makes you more trusted. Imagine this. You're at a restaurant. You order your favorite meal. You wait. But when the food arrives, it's cold, overcooked, not what you expected. You feel disappointed, frustrated, ready to walk away. But then, the manager approaches, apologizes sincerely, remakes the dish, offers a complimentary dessert, checks in to make sure everything is perfect. And by the end of the night, you're not just satisfied, you're loyal, grateful, even impressed. You tell your friends, yeah, they messed up, but they made it right. This is the service recovery paradox, the idea that a customer who experiences a problem that is handled exceptionally well can become more loyal than a customer who never had a problem at all. It feels backwards. Shouldn't perfection win? Shouldn't smooth, flawless experiences build the most trust? Maybe not. Because perfection may impress you, but repairing failure builds something deeper. It builds connection. Think about it. When everything goes right, you're content. But when something goes wrong, and someone shows up, listens, owns it, makes it better, you feel seen. You feel valued. You feel like you matter. That's more than satisfaction. That's relationship. This paradox isn't just about business. It shows up in life, in love, in friendship, in trust. Someone hurts you. They break a promise, let you down, make a mistake. But then, they apologize. Not with excuses, not with defensiveness, but with truth, vulnerability, repair, and somehow, you trust them more. Why? Because now, you know what they do when things go wrong. You've seen their character under pressure. You've seen that when things break, they don't run, they don't hide, they rebuild. And that matters more than never making a mistake. It shows up in parenting. You lose your temper. You yell. You say something you regret. But later, you go to your child, and you say, "I was wrong. I'm sorry." And in that moment, you don't lose authority. You gain humanity. You teach them that love isn't about perfection. It's about repair, responsibility, humility. You teach them that mistakes don't have to end relationships. They can deepen them. It shows up in leadership. A leader makes a bad call. They admit it. Own the consequences. Make a change. Ask for input. And suddenly, the team trusts them more than before. Not because the mistake didn't matter, but because how they handled it mattered more. Because accountability is more powerful than infallibility. And it shows up in ourselves. You fail. You relapse. You fall short. You feel ashamed. Like you've lost all progress. But then, you face it. You take ownership. You begin again. You forgive yourself. And what rises isn't just resilience. It's a new version of you. One that knows how to fail with grace. And recover with power. The service recovery paradox teaches us this. People don't need you to be perfect. They need you to be honest when you're not. They need to know, if things break, will you show up? That's what builds trust. That's what makes relationships last. That's what turns customers into fans, mistakes into memories, and setbacks into loyalty. So next time you mess up, and you will, don't panic. Don't vanish. Don't hide behind silence or pride. Step in. Step up. Make it right. Because in that moment, you're not losing trust. You're building it. Paradox 47, the twin paradox, when time stops being equal. Two twins. Born on the same day. The same moment. Identical in every way. One stays on Earth. The other boards a spacecraft, traveling near the speed of light. Years pass. The twin on Earth grows older. Wrinkles deepen. Bones soften. But the traveling twin returns. Younger. Barely aged at all. Same DNA. Same history. Same family. Different futures. This is the twin paradox, a thought experiment from Einstein's theory of special relativity. It defies common sense. Because in our everyday world, time feels universal. 1 second for me is 1 second for you. But in the world of relativity, time bends. Time slows. Time is relative to motion. And suddenly, two lives, born together, are no longer synchronized. The faster you move through space, the slower you move through time. This is not theory. It's fact. We've observed it with astronauts, with particles, with satellites in orbit. They age more slowly than we do. By milliseconds, sure, but real. And if you could move fast enough, close enough to the speed of light, you could return to Earth and find that centuries had passed, while for you, it was just a few years. That's the paradox. But beyond physics, this paradox holds something deeply human. Because time already feels unequal, doesn't it? Two people go through the same event. A year in school. A job. A breakup. One walks away scarred. The other walks away stronger. Same moment. Different experience. Same time. Different aging. Emotionally. Mentally. Spiritually. We are all the twins. Living side by side. But moving through time, at different speeds. It shows up in grief. You lose someone. And it's like your life stops. Everything slows. You drift through fog. But the world keeps moving. Work continues. People smile. Traffic flows. And you think, how can time keep going, when I'm still here? That's the twin paradox. Time is not equal for everyone. It shows up in trauma. A moment, 1 second, leaves a scar that takes years to heal. You say, "It's been 5 years. Why aren't I over this?" Because inside, you're still on that ship. Time moved for others. But for you, it paused. That's not weakness. That's the truth of the paradox. Time is felt, not just counted. It happens in love. You meet someone, and suddenly time stretches. Hours feel like minutes. Moments feel eternal. You live lifetimes in a glance. And then, it ends. And time drags. Each second feels like an ache. As if love distorted the flow of reality. Because maybe it did. It even happens in success. Someone you know seems to shoot ahead. They age faster in their career, in their achievements, in their recognition. And you feel stuck, left behind. But you don't see their trajectory, their velocity, their unseen costs. Maybe they've been traveling at light speed. And maybe you're the twin on Earth, aging slowly, but deepening, rooted, still, becoming. So what does the twin paradox teach us? That time is not a race, not a straight line, not the same for everyone. It's relative, to motion, to emotion, to attention. And that's not a glitch, it's a gift, because it means you are allowed to move through time at your own speed. You don't need to keep up. You don't need to rush. You just need to be aware of your journey. Einstein didn't just change how we see the universe. He changed how we see ourselves. He proved that time isn't absolute. And neither is growth, or healing, or worth. So if you're aging differently, healing slower, or blooming late, it's okay. Because you are the twin. And your time is yours. Paradox 48, the paradox of the lottery when belief in the impossible becomes rational. You're holding a ticket. The lottery jackpot is astronomical. 1 winner, millions of players. And the odds? 1 in 300 million. You know the probability is microscopic. Virtually zero. And yet, something inside you stirs. Someone has to win. Why not me? It's possible. This is the paradox of the lottery, where it is entirely rational to believe that your individual ticket will lose, and yet equally rational to believe that someone will win. 2 beliefs, both grounded in logic. But they cannot both be true from your perspective. If everyone reasonably believes, my ticket will lose, then no one should expect a winner. But we do. We expect a winner. We plan for it. We build lotteries, games, headlines around it. So how do you reconcile the certainty of loss with the certainty of a winner? That's the paradox. It seems like a simple riddle of probability, but if you zoom in, it becomes a metaphor for hope, for risk, for the way we make choices in an uncertain world. Because the lottery paradox isn't really about gambling. It's about how we believe in long shots, even when logic says not to. And sometimes, we have to. Imagine you're applying for your dream job. Thousands of applicants. You know the odds. You tell yourself, I won't get it. I'm just another number. And yet, you write the cover letter. You send the email. You wait by the phone. Why? Because while you believe you won't win, you also believe someone will. And deep down, why not me? That's not delusion. That's paradoxical hope. It happens in love. You see someone across the room. They're beautiful, brilliant, out of your league. You say, they'd never choose me. But still, you walk over. You say hello. You risk the rejection. Because you know the odds. And you go anyway. Why? Because connection defies probability. And your belief, it doesn't need logic. It needs courage. It appears in healing. You're told the odds of recovery are low. Maybe 1 in 100. Maybe less. But someone heals. Someone always does. And so, you believe in your body. You believe in the path. Not because the data says you will win, but because someone does. That belief, it carries people through the darkest nights. That belief changes outcomes. That belief, even when irrational, keeps people alive. The paradox also shows up in society. People say, one person can't make a difference. What's the point of voting? My voice doesn't matter. And yet, movements begin with one. Change begins with one. Revolutions begin with one. And the moment someone steps forward, others follow. Suddenly, the impossible becomes inevitable. Because the winner of the lottery was someone who believed, even when they knew the odds. So what do we do with this paradox? We hold both beliefs. We acknowledge, I probably won't win, and at the same time, but I might. We live in the tension between statistics and stories, between odds and outcomes, between realism and radiant possibility. The paradox of the lottery reminds us that sometimes the only way forward is to believe in the unlikely, to show up anyway, to try, to act. Because if everyone says, someone will win, but not me, then no one plays, no one tries, no one changes the world. But if even a few say, what if it's me, the world shifts. So keep the ticket, send the email, start the project, confess the feeling, try again. Not because you know you'll win, but because someone will. And on the off chance that it's you, it changes everything. Closing, the truth that lives in paradox. You've walked through riddles that shattered certainty, thought experiments that bent time, space, logic, and your sense of self. You've faced ravens and reflections, swords and shields, watched stars fail to light the night, watched truth collapse under its own weight. And now you're here, changed. Not with answers, but with better questions. Because paradoxes don't exist to be solved. They exist to be lived. They whisper the truths we feel but can't explain. They hold up mirrors to the contradictions within us. The love that hurts. The freedom that traps. The hope that scars. The silence that speaks. They ask you to hold both. Faith and doubt. Motion and stillness. Certainty and surrender. And maybe that's the lesson. That wisdom isn't about choosing one side. It's about standing in the tension. Breathing in the unknown. Sitting with the discomfort. Until it teaches you something you didn't come looking for. Because paradoxes are not dead ends. They are doorways. Doorways into deeper truth. Into compassion. Into humility. They show you that real knowledge doesn't always say, I know. Sometimes, it says, I don't, but I'm still here. I don't, and I'm still choosing. I don't, and I'm still moving forward. So where does this leave us? Right where we began, at the edge of a thought. Looking out into contradiction. Not afraid, but awake. Because now, you understand. To be human is to live in paradox. To grow is to question your certainties. And to truly see the world, you must be willing to see two truths at once. So the next time you feel stuck in contradiction, remember, you're not broken. You're not confused. You're not failing. You're just thinking deeply enough to touch something real. Something that exists beyond logic, beyond reason, beyond the surface. Something that doesn't ask to be solved, only to be seen. Thank you for joining this journey. If this video made you think, if it made you pause, take a moment to breathe in the mystery. And if you'd like to explore more mind-bending ideas, don't forget to subscribe and share this with someone who's not afraid to feel a little lost. Because sometimes, getting lost in a paradox is how we find something true.